Yo, what's up everyone? It's Half-Blood Harry, and today we're checking out, what if a Gringotts blood ritual revealed Harry was the reincarnation of Poseidon's first son and Percy his destined guardian. Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, The Blood Doesn't Lie. The letter from Gringotts arrived on a Tuesday, which Harry thought was a deeply unremarkable day for his life to change completely. He'd been sitting at the kitchen table at number 4, Privet Drive, eating toast with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd learned not to enjoy food too much in case it got taken away. Uncle Vernon was behind his newspaper. Aunt Petunia was at the stove. Dudley was still in bed, sleeping off whatever Dudley slept off these days. It was, by every measurable standard, a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning in July. Then the owl arrived. Not Hedwig, this owl was enormous, the color of old parchment, and it wore a small golden medallion around its neck stamped with the Gringotts crest. It dropped the letter directly onto Harry's plate, disturbing his toast with total authority, and left without waiting for a response. Uncle Vernon's newspaper lowered by approximately 2 inches. "Who's that from?" he said. It wasn't really a question. "Gringotts," Harry said, turning the envelope over. The seal was heavy wax, blood red, pressed with the image of a dragon mid-roar. Beneath it, in script that seemed to shift slightly in the light, for the eyes of Harold James Potter, urgent matter of hereditary disclosure. "Bank business," Uncle Vernon said, in the tone he used when he wanted very badly to pretend something wasn't happening. "Probably routine." Harry broke the seal. The letter inside was written on thick cream parchment in ink so dark it was nearly black, and it was not, by any definition, routine. "Mr. Potter, you are hereby formally notified that the Potter Vault, Vault 687, has triggered a hereditary anomaly flag under the Gringotts Bloodline Verification Statute of 1312. This flag indicates the presence of non-registered ancestral lines of significant magical potency, lines which, under goblin law, require formal documentation to protect both the account holder and the integrity of the vault's contents. You are requested to present yourself at Gringotts Bank, London, at your earliest convenience for a blood heritage ritual. This ritual is standard procedure in cases of flagged anomalies and is entirely non-invasive. Its purpose is documentation only. Failure to respond within 30 days will result in vault access suspension pending investigation. Regards, Sharpclaw, Senior Vault Manager, Gringotts Bank, Diagon Alley. Harry read it twice. Then he folded it, put it in his pocket, and finished his toast. Uncle Vernon's newspaper had not moved. "Everything all right?" Aunt Petunia asked, without turning from the stove, in the voice she used when she already knew the answer was no. "Fine," Harry said. "Bank stuff." He wrote to Hermione before he wrote to Ron, which was a choice he didn't examine too closely. The thing was, Ron's response would be brilliant, "Mate, let's go," and that was genuinely excellent, but Hermione's response would contain actual information. He needed information before he needed enthusiasm. Her reply came in 6 hours, which suggested she'd been waiting near the window with a book. "Harry, a blood heritage ritual is a very old form of goblin magic, one of the few magical practices that predates the founding of Hogwarts entirely. The goblins have been performing them since before recorded wizarding history. The ritual uses a single drop of the subject's blood introduced to a runic basin carved from enchanted lodestone. The blood interacts with the stone and produces what goblins call a heritage map, essentially a magical genealogy that traces every significant bloodline in the subject's ancestry, going back as far as the magic is strong enough to reach. The fact that they're flagging you for an anomaly is interesting, Harry. The Potter line is old but well documented. Whatever they've found, it isn't in any record they already have. I think you should go. I also think you should let me come with you. Also, I've been reading about hereditary anomaly flags specifically, and there's only been 7 recorded cases in the last 500 years. 4 of them involved subjects with divine ancestry. I'll explain what I mean by that in person. Hermione P.S. Tell Ron before he finds out secondhand and sulks about it. Harry told Ron. Ron's response was, in fact, brilliant, mate, let's go, with an added what does Hermione mean by divine ancestry that Harry couldn't answer because he didn't know yet either. They went to Gringotts on a Thursday. Diagon Alley in July had a specific kind of energy. School supplies weren't quite in demand yet, so the crowd was looser, more leisurely, families browsing quality Quidditch supplies without the urgency of September bearing down on them. Harry kept his hood up out of habit more than necessity. He'd noticed, in the last year, that people looked at him differently than they used to. There was something in it that wasn't quite respect and wasn't quite fear but lived uncomfortably between the two, and he didn't enjoy it. "You're doing the hood thing," Ron said, walking on his left. "I'm always doing the hood thing. You look like a suspicious monk. Better than looking like Harry Potter." Ron opened his mouth, closed it, and let that one go, because he was a good friend and understood when to drop it. Hermione was already waiting outside the bank's bronze doors, a small leather satchel over her shoulder and the expression she wore when she'd done significant research and was very slightly vibrating with the need to share it. She'd grown over the last year, they all had, in ways that had less to do with height and more to do with the weight they carried behind their eyes, but Hermione still managed to look like someone who had her life in order, which Harry found both reassuring and vaguely inhuman. "Right," she said, by way of greeting. "I've been reading." "We know," Ron said. "The divine ancestry cases I mentioned in my letter, 3 of the 4 involved bloodlines traced back to Greek and Roman mythology. The goblins have a whole separate classification system for it. They call it Theonheima, divine blood. It's incredibly rare in the wizarding population because most divine bloodlines diluted beyond detectable levels about 800 years ago." She paused. "The ones that didn't dilute are flagged automatically." Harry looked at her. "You think I have divine blood? I think Gringotts thinks you might." "Which is, I mean, Harry, that's," she stopped herself, visibly reining in the excitement. "Let's just see what the ritual shows." The interior of Gringotts was as Harry remembered it, cavernous, echoing, chandeliers throwing gold light across marble floors, goblins moving with the efficient authority of people who have never once in their lives been impressed by a wizard. The queue at the main counter was short. Harry approached the nearest teller and presented his letter. The goblin read it, looked at Harry over the top of it with small, sharp eyes, and said, "Mr. Potter. You'll be with Sharpclaw. Vault manager. Private office, not the main floor. Follow me." They were led through a door behind the main counter, down a corridor Harry hadn't known existed, and into a room that felt entirely different from the public-facing grandeur of the bank's entrance hall. It was smaller, older feeling, with walls of rough stone and shelves lined not with gold but with books and carved stone tablets and glass jars containing things Harry chose not to examine closely. Sharpclaw was waiting for them. He was old, older than any goblin Harry had seen before, which was saying something, because goblins as a rule looked ancient. His skin had the quality of very old wood, deeply lined and somehow dignified for it. His eyes were amber, not the usual dark brown, and they fixed on Harry with an attention that felt less like a bank manager assessing a client and more like a naturalist observing a rare specimen they'd spent decades hoping to see. "Harry Potter," Sharpclaw said. "Not a greeting exactly. More like confirmation." "That's me," Harry said. "Sit. All 3 of you, if you prefer. I have no objection to witnesses." He gestured to chairs arranged before his desk with the air of someone who had been expecting exactly this configuration. They sat. Sharpclaw produced a basin from the shelf behind him, roughly 12 inches across, carved from dark stone that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, its interior surface covered in runes so small Harry couldn't make out individual characters. He placed it on the desk between them. "The bloodline verification ritual," Sharpclaw said, "is older than your ministry, older than your Hogwarts, older than most of what your people call history. It was developed by goblin craftsmen in the 3rd century before your common era, refined over 600 years, and has not failed to produce an accurate result in 1500 years of use. He said this without pride, simply as fact. It requires 1 drop of blood from the subject, introduced to the basin. The process takes approximately 10 minutes. I will read the results. You will not interrupt me while I am reading. Understood, Hermione said. Sharpclaw looked at her. Something in his expression shifted, not warmth exactly, but acknowledgement. You've researched the process. Somewhat. Good. Informed witnesses are preferable. He produced a small silver lancet and slid it across the desk toward Harry. 1 drop. Index finger, preferred, but not required. Harry picked up the lancet, pricked his finger without hesitating. He'd bled enough in his life that a deliberate prick registered barely above nothing, and held it over the basin. A single dark bead of blood fell from his fingertip and hit the lodestone surface. For a moment, nothing. Then the runes lit up. Not gradually, all at once, every character on the basin's surface blazing with pale blue light, and Harry had to resist the urge to lean back because the light seemed to push somehow, like pressure against his chest. Hermione made a small involuntary sound. Ron grabbed the edge of his chair. The light stabilized. Then it began to move, the runes rearranging themselves in patterns that Harry couldn't follow, branching and rebranching in structures that might have been a map or might have been a language he didn't have the framework to read. Sharpclaw leaned forward, his amber eyes tracking the patterns with the focused intensity of a scholar reading a long-awaited text. He didn't speak for 7 minutes. Harry counted, because he needed something to do with his attention, and the back of his neck was crawling in a way that had nothing to do with the ambient magic and everything to do with the particular flavor of dread that arrived when you knew something was about to change and couldn't do anything to stop it. When Sharpclaw finally sat back, his expression was the most complicated thing Harry had ever seen on a goblin's face, and goblins, in Harry's experience, were not given to complex expressions. "Well," Sharpclaw said. "Well?" Harry said. "The Potter line is thoroughly documented and exactly as registered. James Potter, Fleamont Potter, Henry Potter, all correctly recorded, all clean." Sharpclaw's fingers steepled. "Your mother's line is also documented, though imperfectly. The Evans family has deeper roots than your ministry bothers to record. Lily Evans carries a thread of very old magic through her maternal grandmother's line. Celtic origin. That is not what triggered the flag." "Then what did?" Hermione asked. Sharpclaw looked at Harry. "Just Harry. There is a third line," he said. "It does not connect through either parent in the conventional sense. It is not hereditary in the manner of bloodlines passed flesh to flesh. It connects through what my people call soul print, the residual magical signature of a soul, carried forward through reincarnation." The room was very quiet. "What?" Ron said. "Your soul," Sharpclaw said to Harry, his voice carrying the flat certainty of someone delivering a geological fact, "has been here before. Many times, across many centuries. But its origin, the first incarnation, the life from which all subsequent echoes derive their power, that origin is registered in this basin as Theon-Hyma. Divine blood. Specifically," he paused, not for dramatic effect, Harry thought, but because he was selecting his words with the care of someone who understood their weight, "the blood of the sea." The silence stretched. "Poseidon," Hermione whispered. Sharpclaw looked at her without surprise. "You did your research." Yes. But I thought it was a possibility, not, the basin does not deal in possibilities." Sharpclaw turned back to Harry. "Your first incarnation was a son of Poseidon. Not a distant descendant, a direct son, born of the god himself. The soul that animates you now is the same soul that inhabited that first body, 3,000 years ago, and it carries the full divine signature of its origin. Diluted by time and distance, yes. Dormant, largely, under ordinary circumstances. But present. He tapped the basin, where the runes were still glowing, softly now, pulsing like something breathing. This basin has never flagged a soul print of this magnitude. Not once. In 1500 years. Harry stared at the basin. The light pulsed back at him. What does that mean? He said. Practically. What does it actually mean for me? It means several things. Sharpclaw stood and moved to his shelves, retrieving a leather-bound record book with the deliberate care of someone handling a document that mattered. It means the Potter Vault flag was not an error. It means certain abilities you may have experienced and attributed to accidental magic or your own particular talent, abilities relating to water, to pressure, to instinctive understanding of currents and tides and forces you had no logical reason to comprehend, those are not accidental. They are inheritance. And inheritance, he said, setting the record book on the desk, can be claimed. Claimed how? Hermione said, leaning forward. That is a more complicated conversation. Sharpclaw opened the book and made a notation in a script Harry couldn't read. There are parties who would need to be informed. Parties beyond your ministry, I'm afraid. What parties? Sharpclaw looked up. Mr. Potter. Are you familiar with Olympus? Harry blinked. The mountain? In Greece? The concept, Sharpclaw said patiently. The Divine Council. The Olympian gods and the structure of divine authority that has governed the non-mortal world since before your ministry existed, before Rome existed, before most of what humans call civilization. He paused. Your ministry does not acknowledge them. This is a choice your ministry made approximately 400 years ago, for political reasons that seemed sensible at the time and have proven, in the long run, to be profoundly short-sighted. The gods, however, have continued to exist regardless of whether wizards choose to believe in them. I know they exist, Hermione said quietly. There's evidence, if you know where to look. The old magical texts, preministry. There are references. Most wizarding scholars dismiss them as mythology, but the language is too specific to be, Miss Granger, Sharpclaw said, and there was something in his voice that was almost warm. Yes. Correct. The gods are real. They have always been real. And when a soul of this magnitude surfaces, he gestured at the basin, it does not go unnoticed on Olympus. You mean they'll know, Harry said. They'll know about me. They may already. Sharpclaw closed the record book. The ritual sent a signal the moment your blood touched the basin. Not intentionally, it is simply the nature of divine soul prints. They resonate. They announce themselves. He looked at Harry steadily. I am telling you this so that you are not surprised by what comes next. What comes next? Sharpclaw picked up a small stone from his desk, ordinary-looking, pale gray, rounded, and placed it in Harry's palm. It was warm. Warmer than it should have been, warmer than the room accounted for. That is a contact stone. Old magic, older than goblin craft, which is saying something considerable. If someone with divine ancestry activates one in proximity to yours, you will feel it. Keep it with you. Harry turned the stone over in his hand. It sat in his palm like it belonged there. There's one more thing, Sharpclaw said, and his voice dropped, the business-like quality giving way to something that in a human might have been called gravity. I need to tell you about the name. The name? Your first incarnation had a name. It is recorded in the basin, the only time I have ever seen a name surface in a heritage reading. Names don't appear in bloodline rituals. They have no mechanism to do so. But this name surfaced nonetheless, written in the rune structure as clearly as a signature. He looked at Harry. Alcyone. It means kingfisher, in your language. Or, in the older usage, he who wards off evil storms. Harry looked down at the stone in his hand. The warmth of it was spreading up his wrist now, which was probably just body heat, probably just physics and transfer of thermal energy, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like recognition. "Right," he said. "Okay. You're taking this very calmly," Ron said, in the voice of someone who was himself taking it with extreme uncalmness and found Harry's composure deeply suspicious. "I'm not calm," Harry said. I've found out I was a Horcrux and I've come back from the dead and I've had a piece of Voldemort's soul in my head for 14 years. The bar for things that break my calm is pretty high now." Ron opened his mouth. "Voldemort," Sharpclaw repeated, his tone shifting in a way Harry couldn't quite read. "The Dark Lord who pursued you." "Yes. Mr. Potter. I need you to consider something." Sharpclaw folded his hands on the desk. "The Dark Lord who chose you, specifically you, of all the children who fit the prophecy's parameters, chose a child who was, unknowingly, carrying the dormant soulprint of a divine legacy 3,000 years old. The killing curse he used should have worked. By every measure of dark magic, it should have been final." He paused. "It wasn't." Harry stared at him. "The magic in you that turned that curse is not wholly explained by your mother's sacrifice," Sharpclaw said carefully. "Love is powerful. Love magic is some of the oldest protective magic in existence. But what turned that curse and sent it back, that was older than love magic. That was sea deep. That was something that has been protecting that particular soul for 3,000 years and has no intention of stopping." The room felt very large suddenly. Harry's hand closed around the warm stone. "No intention of stopping," he repeated. "None," Sharpclaw said. "Whatever made you, Mr. Potter, whatever you are at the root of you, it is not finished. It has never been finished." He stood, indicating the meeting was drawing to a close, and his manner returned to the efficient professionalism of a bank manager completing a transaction. "Your vault flag has been resolved. The anomaly is documented. You are free to access your vault as normal. A beat. And when you feel that stone warm in your hand in a different way than it does now, sharper, more insistent, pay attention. It means someone is coming." They left Gringotts in a silence that lasted all the way to the leaky cauldron, where Ron broke it by sitting down heavily at a corner table and saying, "Right. I need a butterbeer." "Me too," Harry said. "3, Hermione said, already pulling parchment out of her satchel. Tom brought them over without being asked, which Harry appreciated. They sat with their drinks and the weight of what they'd just been told settling over the table like sediment. "Reincarnation," Ron said finally. Your soul is a reincarnated demigod. Apparently. A son of Poseidon. First son. Apparently that's different." "How is that different?" "I don't know yet." Ron took a long drink of butterbeer. "Brilliant," he said, in a tone that contained at least 6 different emotions simultaneously. "That's just, brilliant. Normal wasn't on the cards, was it? Not even once." "I've been reading about Alcyone," Hermione said, spreading parchment that already had notes on it. She'd clearly been preparing for this before the ritual confirmed anything. "There's almost nothing in wizarding texts, the pre-ministry sources have a few references but they're fragmentary. In Greek mythology proper, Alcyone is primarily known as a figure in the myth of the halcyon bird, transformation story, wind and sea, but the deeper sources, the Olympian records that certain scholars believe exist below the official mythological record, describe a different Alcyone entirely. A demigod son of Poseidon who was not merely powerful but fundamentally different from other demigods. Someone who," she hesitated, which was not like Hermione at all, "who the fates refused to let die." Harry's butterbeer was halfway to his mouth. He put it back down. "Refused to let die." The sources are unclear on the specifics. But the implication is that Alcyone's soul was too much of something. Too powerful, or too important, or too tied to the world structure in some fundamental way. The fates couldn't allow it to simply end. So they recycled it. She looked up at him. Over and over. Every time it's born into a new body, it's a little more what? The word the sources use is bathis, she said. It means deep. Harry looked at his butterbeer. The liquid in the glass was perfectly still, which was ordinary, that was how liquids behaved in glasses, except that he could feel it somehow, in a way he'd never examined before because he'd never had a reason to. He could feel the water in the glass the way you feel your own heartbeat. Present. Constant. Undeniable once you started paying attention. He'd always assumed that was normal. He'd assumed everyone could feel water nearby, the hum of pipes behind walls, the weight of rain in clouds, the particular pull of rivers when you stood near them. He'd assumed it was just heightened awareness, just one of those things, just Harry being odd in one more small way. He looked at the glass. The water rippled, once, in a perfect concentric circle, without anyone touching it. "Oh," Harry said quietly. Ron looked at the glass. Then at Harry. "How long has that been happening?" "My whole life, I think." "Your whole, Harry." "I thought it was accidental magic." "Accidental magic doesn't," Ron gestured at the glass, where the water was now perfectly still again, with the polite stillness of something pretending it hadn't done anything. "That wasn't accidental." "No," Harry agreed. "I don't think it was." Hermione was looking at him with an expression he recognized. It was the expression she wore when something confirmed a hypothesis she'd been hoping was wrong, because the hypothesis being right had enormous implications. "Harry. The things you're good at, that you've always been inexplicably good at. Swimming. Finding your way in the dark. Knowing when a storm was coming before anyone else did. The way you survived things you had no logical reason to survive, Hermione. I'm not saying it to overwhelm you, I'm saying it because you should know that none of that was random. None of it was luck. It was all you. Something real and actual and yours." Harry looked at his hands, both of them, flat on the table. Ordinary hands, by every visual measure. Slightly calloused from years of Quidditch. The lightning bolt scar on his forehead he'd had since before memory. He'd spent his entire life being told what he was, being handed identities he didn't choose, the boy who lived, the chosen one, the unfortunate necessity of a prophecy that got a good man killed. He'd worn those names the way you wear handed-down clothes, because they were there, and it was cold, and you didn't always have the luxury of choosing. But Alcyone. That wasn't a title. That wasn't a prophecy. That was a name, and it was 3,000 years old, and it had been his before any of the rest of it. "Sharpclaw said something was coming," he said. "Someone." "The stone," Hermione confirmed. "When it warms differently." "What do you think that means?" "Who do you think?" "I don't know. But I think," she paused, tapping her quill against the parchment, "if Olympus felt the ritual, and if there's some kind of divine protection on your soul, there might be a mechanism already in place. Something the gods arranged. Someone assigned to what? Watch me? To guard you," she said simply. Harry laughed, short, not unkind. "Another guardian. Brilliant. Because the first 14 years of people being assigned to protect me have gone so smoothly." Ron raised his butterbeer. "To be fair. You're still alive." "To be fair," Harry agreed, and clinked his glass against Ron's, and tried not to think about the fact that the liquid in his glass moved in a gentle, deliberate swirl when he touched the glass, like water acknowledging something it recognized. That night, back at Privet Drive, Harry sat on his bed with the contact stone in his open palm and thought about depth. He thought about what it meant to be deep, not in the self-improvement, inspirational quote sense, but in the literal sense. The deep ocean was a place without light, without the comfortable noise of surface life. It was enormous and patient and kept secrets the surface world had no idea existed. He'd always felt, in some part of himself he'd never been able to name, that he had more in him than what was visible. Not arrogance, he'd never been particularly arrogant about his abilities. It was more like awareness. The sense of a larger room behind the one you were standing in. Now he had a name for it. He was almost asleep when the stone warmed. Not the gentle ambient warmth it had carried all day, this was sharper, more insistent, exactly as Sharpclaw had described. It pulsed against his palm like a second heartbeat, slightly irregular, syncopating with his own. Harry sat up. The stone was glowing faintly, the same pale blue as the runes in the basin, light spilling through his fingers. He didn't know who was coming. He didn't know when, or how, or what the arrival would look like. He knew almost nothing, which was a deeply familiar condition that he'd learned to work with rather than against. He closed his fingers around the stone and lay back down. Outside, the July night was warm and still. Somewhere far away, so far that no physical sense should have been able to register it, Harry could hear the sea. Not literally, not in the way you hear things through air and eardrums. In the way you hear something that is a part of you calling to something that is a part of something else. He was the soul of Alcyone, 3,000 years traveled and finally recognized. He let himself feel what that was without immediately trying to manage it. He'd spent years managing his feelings into smaller shapes so they'd fit into the spaces available to him. For once, he let it be as large as it actually was. It was very large. He fell asleep with the stone warm in his hand, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, he didn't dream about green light or falling or voices behind closed doors. He dreamed about water, deep, vast, ancient water, moving the way only truly old things move. Patient and absolute and entirely without fear. He dreamed about the sea. 300 miles north, beneath the foundations of a building that had stood for over 1,000 years, something ancient and long dormant opened one enormous eye. It recognized what it had just felt. It had been waiting. 4 days later, Hermione sent another letter. It arrived with her usual owl, Crookshanks having apparently objected to owl-related errands again, and it was written in her fastest handwriting, which meant she'd been moving quickly when she wrote it and hadn't stopped to use the neat script she normally preferred. Harry, I've been reading about the divine protection mechanisms the old texts describe. There's a concept in the pre-Homeric sources, Olympian scholarship, not the popular mythology, of a designated guardian. Not a protector in the sense of someone standing in front of you. More like an anchor. A person whose divine heritage is specifically compatible with yours, whose power complements and amplifies your own, and whose soul has a recognized obligation to yours across incarnations. The technical term is keepos. It means guardian, but the literal translation is closer to keeper of the garden, the idea being that the soul is the garden and the keepos keeps it from being trampled. Harry, every recorded instance of a Theonheima soul print surfacing has been accompanied by the arrival of a keepos. Not chosen. Not assigned. Just, there. Drawn by the same resonance that the contact stone detects. I think whoever is coming is your keepos. I also think, and I want to be careful about how I say this, that whoever it is, they are also a child of Poseidon. The sources are very specific, the guardian must share the same divine root. They have to be from the same sea. Be careful, Harry. But also, don't be afraid. The texts are clear on one thing, the keepos comes because they're meant to. Not because they were sent. Harry read the letter twice. Then he picked up the contact stone from his nightstand. It was warm. Insistent. Pulsing. Whoever it was, they were getting closer. He put the stone in his pocket, went downstairs, and ate breakfast with the Dursleys, who said nothing, and he said nothing, and the whole table vibrated with the comfortable normalcy of people pretending the world wasn't constantly on the verge of cracking open. The stone pulsed against his thigh every 17 seconds, precisely, like a lighthouse sending its signal into the dark. Harry counted the pulses. He waited. Chapter 2, The Boy the Sea sent. Percy Jackson had been having a perfectly acceptable Thursday when Poseidon's voice came out of the shower. Not literally out of the shower, the voice came from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously, the way divine communication always did, like someone had tuned the frequency of the air itself to carry a specific message. Percy was standing in the bathroom of the apartment he'd been sharing with his mom and Paul since the end of the Titan War, towel over his shoulder, toothbrush in hand, entirely unprepared for divine interruption at 7:45 in the morning. Percy. The water in the shower changed pressure. Just slightly, enough that Percy, who noticed water the way other people noticed gravity, felt it immediately. He put the toothbrush down. "Dad," he said, to the steam. "There is something you need to know." Poseidon's voice was the ocean at night, vast and layered, something massive moving beneath the surface of every syllable. "Something has happened. Something I have been waiting for, in truth, for a very long time." "Okay," Percy said, because he'd learned a long time ago that stalling with a god was pointless. "What?" "A ritual was performed 4 days ago. In Britain. A goblin craft ritual, old magic, older than what those people call their history. It found what it was looking for." A pause, long and deliberate, waited with something Percy couldn't name. "A soul print. My son's soul print. Not yours, Perseus. One that predates you by 3,000 years. Percy was quiet for a moment. "I have a brother I don't know about." "Not a brother. Not in the conventional sense." The shower pressure shifted again, the water wasn't hot or cold anymore, just present, filling the room with the specific kind of awareness Percy associated with his father being very serious about something. "Do you know what a soul print is?" Chiron mentioned it once. "Something about souls carrying their history forward." "Yes. When a soul of sufficient power and divine origin lives and dies, it does not simply disperse. It continues. It is reborn, again and again, carrying the essence of what it was, not memories, not identity exactly, but the power. The fundamental nature. The sea doesn't forget what it made, Percy. Even when the vessel changes." Another pause. "My first son, born 3,000 years ago, in a time before your Rome, before your Greece as you know it, his soul has been cycling through the world since his death. And 4 days ago, in Britain, it surfaced in a boy who has spent his entire life not knowing what he carries." Percy leaned against the wall. "Who is he?" "His name is Harry Potter." Something in the way Poseidon said the name suggested he'd been holding it carefully for a very long time, like something fragile. "He is 14 years old. He has survived things that should not have been survivable, because the soul inside him has been surviving for 3,000 years and has learned how. He has abilities he cannot explain. He is carrying a weight he does not yet understand. And he is currently sitting in a house in a part of England called Surrey, holding a contact stone a Gringotts goblin gave him, waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For you." Percy was quiet for a long time. Outside, through the bathroom door, he could hear his mom moving in the kitchen, the specific sound of Saturday morning coffee being made, Paul's voice saying something that made her laugh. "Normal sounds. Good sounds. You're telling me he's my, what? My responsibility?" "I am telling you," Poseidon said, and his voice carried something Percy had very rarely heard in it, something close to urgency, that he is family. And that the last time that soul was in the world, I was not there to protect it. I have spent 3,000 years watching it travel from life to life, always moving, always surviving, never settled. Never fully recognized for what it is." The water in the shower went very still. "This time, Percy, it has a chance to be something more than a soul running from what it doesn't understand about itself. But only if it has the right anchor." "Anchor," Percy repeated. "Kypos," Poseidon said. The word landed in the steam-filled air like a stone dropping into still water. "Guardian. You are his Kypos, Percy. You have always been. It is why I asked for you when you were born, not just because your mother was remarkable, though she was. But because the world was going to need a guardian with your exact particular set of stubborn, ridiculous, loyal qualities, and I needed you to be ready. Percy laughed despite himself, short and slightly disbelieving. You're telling me my entire life has been prep for babysitting? Not babysitting. And Percy swore he could hear something like amusement in the god's voice, deep and tidal. He does not need a babysitter. He needs someone who knows what it means to carry Poseidon's legacy and not be crushed by it. Someone who will stand next to him, not in front of him. A beat. He is not a child to be protected, Percy. He is something ancient wearing a child's face. But even ancient things need someone who sees them clearly. The shower turned off. The steam began to dissipate. The conversation, Percy understood, was drawing to a close in the way divine conversations did, not with a goodbye but with a simple withdrawal, the presence pulling back like a tide going out. How do I find him? Percy asked quickly. The stone will guide you. You'll know. Dad, wait. How bad is it? The situation he's in? The water in the pipes behind the walls hummed once, low and resonant, and Percy understood it the same way he understood currents, by feeling, not by logic. Very, said the sea. Then the bathroom was just a bathroom, and Percy was standing in it with a towel and a toothbrush and a very large responsibility that had arrived before he'd even had coffee. He stood there for 10 seconds. Then he went to pack. His mom took it better than he expected, which was to say she made him eat breakfast first and asked 3,000 questions with the rapid-fire precision of someone who'd been absorbing Percy's impossible news for 16 years and had developed impressive stamina for it. Britain, she said. Britain. A wizarding family. Apparently. A goblin bank ritual that reveals divine ancestry. Yes. And your father spoke to you through the shower. Through the shower pressure, technically. Sally Jackson set down her coffee cup with the deliberate care of a woman choosing not to throw it at the wall. Percy. I need you to understand that I love you and I support you and I would follow you into any impossible situation. I also need you to understand that I am 42 years old and I have been doing this since you were 7 and I am tired. I know, Mom. Not tired of you, she clarified, in the firm voice she used when she thought he might misunderstand. Tired of the universe's complete inability to let you have a normal Thursday. It was a Thursday, Percy confirmed. I was brushing my teeth. Paul appeared in the kitchen doorway, reading glasses pushed up on his head, and assessed the situation with the particular intuition of a man who'd married into a demigod family and adjusted accordingly. Trip? He asked. Trip, Sally confirmed. Britain specifically, Percy said. I don't know for how long. And I need to find a boy named Harry Potter, which, I know that sounds like I made it up. I'll look up flights, Paul said, already retreating to the living room with the calm efficiency that Harry deeply admired in him. His mom always said Paul was proof that the right mortal could handle anything. Percy thought she was right. Percy. His mom touched his arm, and he stopped. She had her serious face on, not the worried face, which he saw more often, but the serious one, which she reserved for moments she wanted him to carry. Be careful. Not of the danger, I know you're past the point where I can tell you to be careful of danger. Be careful with him. You said he doesn't know what he is yet. That's a vulnerable position to be in, even for someone powerful. Especially for someone powerful. Percy looked at his mom for a moment, really looked at her, the way you sometimes forgot to when you saw someone every day. She was the person who'd made him. Not in the divine sense, Poseidon had contributed something to his existence, yes, and he'd made peace with that, mostly, but in every sense that actually mattered, Sally Jackson had made him. The loyalty, the stubbornness, the absolute inability to abandon anyone who needed him. All of that was hers. I will, he said. I'll be careful. She hugged him, brief and fierce. Eat something on the plane. He took Riptide, his pen that was a sword, the most reliable constant in his life, and a backpack of clothes and the particular focused energy he carried into every quest, which was less bravery and more a kind of determined momentum, the feeling of leaning forward into what was coming rather than bracing against it. The flight to London was 8 hours and Percy spent 6 of them staring out the window at the Atlantic below, thinking about depth. He landed at Heathrow on a Friday morning, jet-lagged and carrying a coffee that the flight attendant had pressed on him with the look people sometimes gave Percy when they couldn't articulate why he seemed notable. He got through customs with a passport Chiron had arranged years ago for exactly this kind of situation, took the tube into central London with the map held in front of him like a shield, and emerged into the grey July drizzle of a city that smelled like wet stone and history. He'd been in a lot of old cities. Rome had felt ancient in the way ruins felt ancient, impressive, structural, the skeleton of something that used to breathe. London felt ancient differently. It felt like something that was still breathing under all the modern surface, still conducting old business in the foundations and the side streets and the layers of itself that tourists didn't see. Percy liked it immediately. He also, the moment he stepped onto the pavement outside the tube station, felt the contact stone in his jacket pocket pulse. He pulled it out, small, pale gray, the kind of rock you'd find on any beach and carry in your pocket without ever quite being able to explain why you kept it. Poseidon had pressed it into his hand in a dream, 3 nights ago, and told him simply, "You'll know what to do with it." The stone was warm, and as Percy stood on the wet London pavement with his backpack and his jet lag, the warmth sharpened. Directional. West. And slightly south. Right, Percy said to himself. Compass stone. Okay. He started walking west. He took the train to Surrey, because the stone pulled that way, and he found himself 40 minutes later standing on a street called Privet Drive that was so aggressively normal it almost looped back around to being uncanny. Every house was identical in the way that suggested a deep-seated cultural anxiety about individuality. The lawns were all mowed to the same height. There were matching planters on 3 consecutive doorsteps. Percy had grown up in New York City and the concept of this level of voluntary uniformity made him feel slightly untethered. He stood at the end of the street and let the stone guide him. Number 4. Percy looked at it. Neat. Ordinary. The kind of house that radiated deliberate averageness the way some things radiated heat. The curtain in the upstairs front window moved slightly. Percy walked up the path and knocked. The woman who answered the door was thin and blonde and had the kind of face that had once been pretty and was now occupied entirely by tension, as though every muscle had been contracted for so long it had forgotten how to release. She looked at Percy, his height, his dark hair, the backpack, the American accent when he said good morning, and her expression went through several phases in quick succession, ending on a watchful neutrality that Percy recognized as the face people made when they were deciding whether to be frightened. "Can I help you?" she said, in the tone that meant please go away. "I'm looking for Harry Potter," Percy said. "I think he's expecting me." Roughly. The woman's face did something complicated. Her eyes went to his jacket pocket, where the stone was pulsing visibly now, the pale blue light just barely visible through the fabric. "Petunia?" A large man appeared at the end of the hallway, filling it considerably. He looked at Percy with the expression of someone who wanted very badly to say there are no wizards at this address and knew it wouldn't work. "He's asking for the boy," the woman, Petunia, said, in a voice stripped of everything except the fact. A beat. Then footsteps on the stairs. Harry Potter came down to the hallway, and Percy's first thought was that Poseidon had undersold it. He'd been expecting, Percy wasn't sure what he'd been expecting. A kid, clearly. Probably a kid who felt powerful in the way demigods felt powerful, that particular hum of something more than mortal. What he hadn't been expecting was the way the air changed when Harry walked into the hall. Not dramatically, not lightning and thunder, not anything that could be pointed to specifically. More like pressure shifting. The way it shifted underwater when something large moved nearby. A change in the weight of the room. Harry was slight, smaller than Percy, which didn't surprise him, with black hair going in approximately 6 directions and green eyes that were looking at Percy with an expression of focused assessment that was a lot more composed than Percy had expected from a 14-year-old who'd just had his reality reorganized 4 days ago. There was a scar on his forehead in the shape of a lightning bolt, which Percy's brain filed away as mythologically interesting. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt that was 2 sizes too large, and he had one hand in his jacket pocket. The pocket was faintly glowing blue. So was Percy's. Huh, Harry said. Yeah, Percy agreed. They stood in the hallway of number 4, Privet Drive, with their contact stones pulsing in synchronized rhythm, and looked at each other. You're American, Harry said. New York. You're shorter than I expected. Everyone says that and I find it deeply unfair. A beat. You're Percy Jackson. You knew my name? Hermione figured it out. She's very good at figuring things out. Harry looked at the Dursleys, who were hovering at the end of the hallway with the energy of people who wanted to be anywhere else. I'll be outside, he told them, in a tone that wasn't asking permission, and stepped past Percy and out the front door. Percy followed him, and the door closed behind them with a firmness that suggested the Dursleys were very grateful to be on the other side of it. Harry walked to the end of the garden and sat on the low wall at its border, which put him facing the street. Percy sat beside him. The July drizzle had thinned to barely mist, the air soft and grey and smelling like cut grass. Hermione said your name because of the Kipos thing, Harry said. She read that the Guardian had to be a child of Poseidon. And then she cross-referenced it with everything she'd been able to find about living children of Poseidon, and apparently you're famous. In certain circles. What circles? The circles that know about Olympus. A slight pause. The wizarding world has officially pretended Olympus doesn't exist for about 400 years. But unofficially, the old families know. It's one of those things everyone knows and nobody says. Harry looked at him sideways. Did your father send you? He talked to me. He didn't, it wasn't an order. It felt more like, he was telling me something I was going to do anyway and just hadn't been informed about yet. Harry absorbed that. What did he tell you about me? Percy considered how to answer. He was a fairly direct person, bluntness came naturally, partly personality and partly 16 years of operating in situations where there wasn't time for careful phrasing, but he was also not an idiot, and he could see that Harry was doing something specific, which was maintaining control of a situation that had been out of his control since Tuesday. The composed exterior wasn't coldness. It was effort. The kind of effort that costs something. He told me your soul is 3,000 years old, Percy said. That you've been reincarnated a bunch of times. That the first life was his son, the first child he had, before recorded history basically. He said his name was Alcyone. Something moved across Harry's face at the name, not surprise. More like the particular expression of someone hearing a word they already knew, one they'd been carrying without knowing they knew it. He said he's been watching it, your soul, cycle through lives for 3,000 years, and this time he wanted it to be different. He wanted you to actually know what you are. Percy paused. He also said the situation was very bad, which from an Olympian god that's significant, because the bar for very bad is considerably higher than for humans. He's not wrong, Harry said. The situation is bad. There's a Dark Lord who wants to kill me, well, technically he's already tried several times and it didn't work, but he's more motivated than ever now and he has an army, and the Ministry of Magic that's supposed to deal with these things is currently in collective denial about whether he's even back. A pause. And apparently there's also something else. Sharpclaw, the goblin at the bank, he implied there was someone who'd been tracking this. The soul. Alcyone's soul print, specifically. Percy frowned. Tracking it how? He didn't say. He just said I should be aware. Harry looked at his hands. And now I've got sea powers waking up on top of everything else. What kind of stuff is happening? Water moves when I'm near it. Not dramatically, I'm not summoning tidal waves or anything. Just responding. Like it knows me. He hesitated. I can hear it. Water. Not like voices. More like awareness. I know where it is. I can feel it through walls, through the ground. Last night I was in my room and I could feel the Thames, and that's 60 miles away. Percy was quiet for a moment. That's more than I could do at 14. Is that worrying? Honestly? Percy glanced at him. It's just you. You said Alcyone was the first son, Poseidon's first direct demigod child. 3,000 years of the same soul cycling and deepening and coming back. Of course you've got more. You've been practicing for 3 millennia. He said it matter-of-factly, because that was how it was, and Harry was clearly someone who preferred facts to cushioning. Does it scare you? Harry thought about it. It doesn't scare me. It's more like, I've been walking around all my life aware that there was a room behind me that I couldn't see into. And now the door's open. That's not frightening. It's clarifying. Percy looked at him. The composed exterior made more sense now. It wasn't performance, it wasn't brittle control. Harry had walked through enough genuinely terrifying things that sea powers and divine heritage barely moved the needle. That was either impressive or concerning or possibly both. Right, Percy said. So. What do we do first? Harry looked at him with a very slight expression of surprise, like he'd expected more preamble. First. We go talk to Dumbledore. Percy blinked. Who's Dumbledore? The headmaster of my school. He also functions as the closest thing the wizarding world has to a commander-in-chief in matters involving Dark Lords. He needs to know about this. Harry slid off the wall, already moving. He also needs to know about you, which is a conversation I'm looking forward to approximately not at all. Why not? Because Dumbledore knows everything about everything, and he spent my entire life parceling that information out in whatever order he judges most beneficial for the greater good. The idea that there's a whole dimension of my existence he had no knowledge of, Harry's voice was carefully even, that's going to be an interesting conversation. Percy fell into step beside him. They were, he noticed, a good match in terms of pace. Harry moved with the efficient purposefulness of someone who'd learned not to waste motion, and Percy naturally matched it. You're not a fan of your headmaster. I trust him, Harry said, which notably wasn't the same thing. And I think he genuinely wants the right outcomes. But he has a habit of deciding what's best for people without asking them, and, a short pause, I've had enough of that from people twice his age. Percy thought about Chiron, who was not remotely the same kind of authority figure but shared the particular quality of knowing more than he said. He thought about how that felt from the inside, the faith you placed in someone's wisdom rubbing constantly against the part of you that needed to understand, needed to choose. Yeah, he said. I get that. They caught the train back to London and then the night bus, Harry's idea, Percy's first experience, and an absolutely horrifying one, to somewhere near King's Cross, where Harry apparently knew a pub that served as a junction point for wizarding communications, and from there sent an owl to Dumbledore. While they waited, Harry had learned a long time ago that owls were faster than they had any right to be. They sat in the pub and Percy ate the largest sandwich he'd ever encountered and tried to calibrate everything. Tell me about the things you can do, he said. Water-related. Just, tell me what you've noticed. Harry shrugged, wrapping his hands around a mug of tea. I can feel water. All of it, within, I don't know how large a radius. Large. I don't know the limit yet. He paused. I can move it. Small quantities easily. Larger quantities, I've done it accidentally. Last winter there was a storm and the drainage pipe outside the school gymnasium burst and flooded the corridor and I walked through the corridor and the water, he stopped. It moved away from me. Like it was getting out of my way. I thought it was my imagination. It wasn't. No. And I can breathe underwater. I found that out when I was 8. I fell into a canal in London and the family who found me thought it was a miracle I survived, but I wasn't holding my breath, I was just breathing. The water wasn't water when I breathed it, it was just air. Just fine. Percy nodded. I can do that too. Did it for the first time at 12. You did it at 12. I did it at 8. Harry looked at his tea. Is that, I told you. You've been doing this for 3,000 years. Right. A pause. Can you talk to sea creatures? Fish, yeah. Ocean life. Marine mammals. It's limited to aquatic. I talked to a seahorse at the aquarium once. I was 9. I thought I was going insane. Harry's voice was flat, but his eyes were slightly wide at the memory. He told me his name. He also told me the tank was too small and the temperature was wrong, and I told the keeper. I said the temperature was wrong, I don't know how I knew but I knew, and they checked and it was, and they fixed it. He looked at Percy. I thought I'd read it on an information board. I made myself believe that. Percy felt something that was probably what his mother meant when she talked about heartbreak that wasn't your own. Not pity, Percy didn't do pity, it was condescending and useless, but something adjacent to it. The particular sadness of someone who'd spent their whole life explaining away the truest parts of themselves because there'd been nothing around them large enough to hold the truth. You don't have to do that anymore, Percy said. Explain it away. Harry looked at him. Something in his expression shifted, the composed surface cracking just slightly, like ice in spring, the kind of crack that doesn't mean collapse but means moving. No, he said, like he was trying the word on. I don't, do I? No. Percy finished his sandwich. You really don't. Dumbledore's reply arrived with a barn owl that was very clearly operating on a schedule it took seriously. The letter was brief, written in purple ink, and said that Dumbledore would meet them at Grimmauld Place, Harry's godfather Sirius's house, which had recently become the headquarters for a resistance organization called the Order of the Phoenix, the following morning. Harry read it and handed it to Percy without comment. Percy read it. The Order of the Phoenix. Resistance movement. Against Voldemort. Harry said the name without flinching, which Percy noted. Most people don't say his name. I do. Names aren't weapons unless you give them power. I say Kronos's name, Percy said. Former enemy. Titan Lord. People do the same flinching thing. He handed back the letter. This godfather of yours, Sirius. It's complicated. He was imprisoned for 12 years for something he didn't do, and he was just cleared last year, and he's currently living in his family's house which he hates, and he's the best person I know. A beat. He'll like you. He has a decent sense of humor and he doesn't talk to me like I'm 12. What about your friends? Hermione and Ron. I already sent an owl. They're coming to Grimmauld Place tomorrow morning. Hermione has about 6,000 questions for you, I want you to be emotionally prepared. Percy thought of Annabeth and felt an immediate kinship. I can handle thorough people. She's not thorough. She's comprehensive. There's a difference. They found a hotel near King's Cross that didn't ask too many questions, because Percy was 16 and traveling alone, and establishments that catered to the international backpacking crowd had seen stranger. Harry, apparently, had simply never considered staying in hotels and found the concept of paying for a room with a television and a minibar faintly extraordinary. You've never stayed in a hotel, Percy said. I've stayed in a tent, Harry said. That's adjacent. It really isn't. They had the particular easy silence of two people who'd been dropped into an unexpected dynamic and were discovering, with some surprise, that it fit. Percy had a lot of friends, genuine ones, the kind forged in impossible situations, and he knew the difference between compatibility you worked for and compatibility that just existed. This was the latter. Harry didn't require filling silences, didn't perform ease, just occupied the space next to Percy with a directness and a quiet that Percy found genuinely comfortable. "Can I ask you something?" Harry said, when they'd been quiet for a while. "Yeah." "What's he like?" "Poseidon." As a father." Percy thought about it honestly. He owed Harry honesty more than he owed him comfort. "He's not present. Not the way your stepdad Paul is present, or the way, he doesn't show up for things. He shows up when it matters, but he and I have a complicated thing where I've basically saved the world and Olympus hasn't always shown up for me in proportion to that, and I've had to decide to be okay with what he can actually give rather than spending my life resenting him for what he can't." He paused. "He loves you, though. In the way he can. He's been watching your soul for 3,000 years, that's not nothing, even for a god. The fact that he sent me specifically, the fact that he talked to me about it the way he did, that's," Percy searched for the right words, "that's Poseidon actually trying." Harry absorbed that. He loves a soul he's watched cycle through 30 centuries. "Yeah. I think so. He's never met me. He doesn't really work in meetings. He works in," Percy gestured at the ceiling, at the air, at nothing specific. "In currents. In the water you feel through walls at 60 miles. In the fact that a killing curse bounced off you when you were 1 year old." He looked at Harry. "You've had his protection your whole life and didn't know it. Doesn't change what it was." Harry didn't say anything, but the water in the glass on the bedside table moved in a slow, deliberate circle. Not distress. Something more settled than that. They went to Grimmauld Place the following morning. Number 12 was exactly as Harry had described, tall, dark, aggressive about its own grimness, and occupying a space between the other buildings that seemed to actively resist the eye. Harry pressed his palm to the door and it opened for him with the ease of long familiarity. Sirius was in the kitchen. He was tall, dark-haired, with the particular lean quality of someone who'd been through more than their body had really been designed to absorb, and eyes that were still bright despite it, the sharpest gray Percy had ever seen, assessing and warm simultaneously. He looked at Percy for approximately 3 seconds, looked at Harry, and said, "You're a demigod." "Percy Jackson," Percy confirmed. "Son of Poseidon." Sirius looked at Harry. "Your soul's divine guardian." Hermione explained. "She's been busy," Harry said, dropping into a chair. "She arrived 3 hours ago and has reorganized my bookshelf by subject and cross-subject thematic relevance, which she claims is more efficient than alphabetical." Sirius poured tea with the automatic hospitality of someone who'd grown up in a house with house elves and hadn't entirely lost the hosting instinct. "Ron is eating everything in the kitchen." "Percy, tea?" "Please," Percy said, because his mother had raised him with manners that survived even interdimensional mythological crises. Hermione appeared in the kitchen doorway 3 minutes later with a notebook and the controlled energy of someone who had been waiting to ask questions since approximately Tuesday. She was shorter than Percy had imagined. He'd pictured someone physically large, the way very intellectual people sometimes got pictured, but she had a presence that occupied considerably more space than her height. She looked at Percy and said, "You survived Tartarus." Percy blinked. "Yes." "And you held up the sky." "Also yes." "And you've been to Olympus multiple times." "Where are you going with this?" "I need to understand the structure," she said, sitting down and opening the notebook. "The Olympian power system, the relationship between divine influence and earthly events, the degree to which Greek mythology maps accurately onto the actual divine reality." She paused and looked up. "Do you mind if I ask you a lot of questions?" "She always says it like it's a question," Ron said from the stove, where he was making eggs with the focus of someone who took breakfast very seriously. He glanced at Percy. "It's not a question." "I guessed," Percy said. "It's not a problem," Hermione said, with dignity. I'm simply gathering information in an organized manner. You alphabetized my bookshelf without asking, Sirius said. That was organizational improvement, not interrogation. Different thing entirely. Ron caught Percy's eye across the kitchen, and the look they exchanged was the particular wordless communication of two people who recognized each other immediately as the friends of very intense people. Dumbledore arrived at 10 o'clock precisely. Percy hadn't known what to expect, exactly, but he'd been picturing someone in the Chiron mode, ancient, knowing, comfortable with the weight of a very long view. Dumbledore was that, yes, but there was something in his eyes that was different from Chiron's patient wisdom. Chiron had acceptance in his eyes. Dumbledore had calculation. Not coldness, the calculation of someone who genuinely cared about outcomes and had learned to think in very long arcs to achieve them. Percy found he respected it and was slightly wary of it simultaneously. Dumbledore sat at the kitchen table, accepted tea from Sirius, and looked at Harry for a long moment before he said, "I would like to hear it from you." Harry told him. Concisely and completely, without softening or editorializing. The letter from Gringotts, the ritual, Sharpclaw's explanation, the name, the contact stone, the water. Percy watched Dumbledore's face through the whole account and saw, almost nothing. A very slight widening of the eyes when Harry said Alcyone, quickly controlled. A very slight pause before he responded. "I see," Dumbledore said. "Do you?" Harry said, and Percy caught the particular quality in his voice, not accusation, not quite. "More like I'm asking sincerely, because if you knew, I'd like to know how long." Dumbledore held Harry's gaze. "I suspected," he said, and Percy thought, points for honesty. "Not specifically. Not with enough certainty to say anything definitively. But there have been indicators throughout your life that your connection to water-based magic was unusual. More than accidental. I did not know the word Alcyone. I did not know the mechanism." He paused. "I should have investigated more thoroughly. I acknowledge that." "All right," Harry said simply. "What I am wondering," Dumbledore continued, "is whether the entity responsible for the anomaly flag at Gringotts is the whole of it." Sharpclaw suggested someone had been tracking the soul print. His eyes moved to Percy briefly. "Mr. Jackson. In your experience with divine matters, is this the kind of thing that attracts attention beyond the immediate parties? Divine soul prints?" Percy said. "Definitely. You've got a soul that's been identified as the first and most powerful child of one of the three major Olympian gods. In my world, that's the kind of thing that draws every entity with an agenda, monsters, rival gods, power-hungry mortals, everything. The bigger the divine signal, the bigger the target." Dumbledore nodded slowly. "Then the question becomes not only who is coming to support Harry, but who is coming for other reasons." He looked at Harry. "This changes things somewhat. I will need to speak with the Order." "I figured," Harry said. "I will also need to contact certain individuals who have knowledge of the Olympian world that I lack." He picked up his teacup with the precise deliberateness of someone thinking three things simultaneously. "There is a name I have encountered in old texts. A wizard who was researching the connection between divine heritage and wizarding magic long before the ministry severed the official relationship with Olympus. A man who disappeared from recorded history approximately 50 years ago." He set the cup down. "Corvus Vale." The name hit the kitchen the way a stone hits still water, impact and then ripples. "You know about him," Percy said. "I know of him," Dumbledore corrected. "I've been concerned about him for some time. The name surfaces occasionally in very old, very specific research. Always in connection with divine soul prints. Always asking the same question." He looked at Harry steadily. "He has been looking for Alcyone's soul for a very long time." Harry met Dumbledore's gaze. "How long?" Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "Since before your parents were born," he said. The kitchen was very quiet. The water in the pot on the stove moved in a slow, barely visible current that had nothing to do with heat and everything to do with the boy sitting at the table, who was looking at Dumbledore with green eyes that were deep and old and completely unafraid. "Then we'd better get ready," Harry said. Percy, beside him, felt the contact stone pulse once in his pocket, warm and steady, like a second heartbeat. Like something that had found what it was looking for. Chapter 3, Old Water, New Wounds. The training started the morning after Dumbledore's visit, because Harry decided it would, and nobody argued with him about it. That was new. 6 months ago, even 3 months ago, Harry would have waited for someone to tell him what to do next, would have sat in the careful space between one adult's instruction and the next and tried to be patient. He'd spent 14 years being managed, being positioned, being the chess piece that other people moved with good intentions and insufficient consultation. He was done with that. Not bitterly, he didn't have the energy for bitterness and it wasn't useful anyway, but definitively. He was up at 6 and in the long, narrow garden behind Grimmauld Place while the rest of the house was still sleeping, standing barefoot on the dew-wet grass because he discovered, somewhere between Gringotts and here, that he could feel the water table through his feet when he wasn't wearing shoes. It was 30 feet down, moving slow and heavy through old London clay, and Harry stood above it and felt it the way you feel your own pulse, ambient, present, entirely natural. He was trying to understand the scope of it. He'd been cataloguing, privately, the things he could do. Not performing them, not testing them dramatically, just paying attention. Water within 100 yards responded to his attention without him trying. Water farther than that, he had to reach for, and reaching felt exactly like stretching a muscle he hadn't known he had but which had apparently been developing for his entire life regardless. The Thames, 60 miles away, was a distant hum at the edge of his awareness. He thought if he tried, really tried, he could probably feel it more clearly. He wasn't ready to try yet. He wanted to know what he was working with before he pushed it. Percy came out 20 minutes later with 2 mugs of coffee and the unhurried movement of someone who'd learned to recognize focused silence and not disrupt it. He handed Harry one of the mugs without saying anything, sat on the low garden wall, and waited. Harry appreciated that about him. Percy Jackson talked a lot, he was funny and quick and had a running commentary on the world that was genuinely entertaining, but he also had a quality of attention that switched on completely when something mattered, and when that switch flipped, he didn't fill the space with noise. "What can you feel right now?" Percy asked, when Harry had had half his coffee. "Water table, 30 feet down. The pipes in the house, there's a leak somewhere in the second floor, by the way, you should tell Sirius. Condensation on every window on this street. The Thames." Harry paused. "There's a fountain in a garden 6 houses over. I can feel every drop." Percy nodded. "That's passive. That's just you existing in proximity to water. What happens when you try to move something?" Harry looked at his coffee mug. The liquid inside turned in a slow clockwise rotation, accelerated, reversed without prompting, and settled. "That's easy," Harry said. "Small quantities, contained. That's nothing. What's the largest thing you've moved accidentally?" "The flood in the school corridor. That was about, I don't know, 200 gallons maybe. Accidentally, with no focus, in a moment of stress." Percy leaned forward, elbows on knees. "That's not small. When I was 14, accidentally I could fill a bathtub. Moving 200 gallons without trying is, you said I've had more practice. I also said that like it was a small thing, and it isn't." Percy held his gaze. "Harry. 3,000 years of the same soul accumulating the same power, that's not a head start. That's a completely different category. I don't want you underselling what you're working with, because if you undersell it and then something comes at you and you need everything you've got, you need to know the size of what you're reaching for." Harry looked at him steadily. "All right. Then teach me the size of it. That's what I'm trying to do." Percy stood, setting his mug on the wall. "Come here." Away from the house. They moved to the far end of the garden, and Percy produced a bowl from somewhere, ceramic, clearly filched from Sirius's kitchen, and filled it with water from the outdoor tap. He set it on the grass between them. "Full control first," Percy said. "Not moving it around. Full control means you know exactly where every molecule is, you know the exact pressure and temperature, you know what it would take to change state, liquid to vapor, liquid to ice. Total awareness. That's the baseline. Without that, everything else is just force." Harry looked at the bowl. He extended his awareness into it, and it was easier than breathing. That was the part that kept surprising him, the utter naturalness of it, and found that Percy was right. The water wasn't just a volume. It was a collection of distinct presences, each one individual, temperature and movement and the particular quality of London water moving through old pipes. He knew all of it without thinking about it. "Done," he said. Percy blinked. "Already? I told you. It's like you asking me if I can feel my own hand." "Right." Percy looked at the bowl, and Harry could see him recalibrating on the fly, the way a good teacher adjusted to a student moving faster than the lesson. "Okay. Then the next thing." He crouched, put one hand over the bowl without touching the water, and the bowl's contents rose, smoothly, with no splash, rising in a column of water that rotated slowly, about 18 inches tall. He released it and it fell back without losing a drop. Like that. Not just moving it, holding it. Any volume, any shape, any duration. Harry looked at the bowl. He thought about the water table 30 feet below him, the weight and movement of it, and he reached, and the bowl's water rose in a sphere rather than a column, not because he was showing off but because a sphere came more naturally, felt more balanced, and he held it there. Then he flattened it into a disc, thinned it to a sheet barely visible in the morning light, and brought it back to a sphere. He let it fall. Percy was quiet for a moment. How much effort was that? None, Harry admitted. Genuinely none. A beat. Then Percy smiled, the full version, not the polite social one Harry had seen him deploy around Sirius and Dumbledore, but the real one, sharp and slightly delighted. "Okay," he said. "We're going to skip several stages of this." "What stages?" "The stages where I teach you things you already know how to do and we both pretend it's useful." Percy sat back down on the grass, shifted his thinking. "What can't you do? What have you tried that didn't work?" Harry sat across from him. This was what he'd been waiting for, actually, someone to ask the right question. "I can't control it when I'm angry," he said. "I can feel everything intensify, the water responds more to emotion than to intention, and when there's too much emotion, it just," he stopped. "Amplifies. Dangerously. I broke a water main once. I was 12, there was a confrontation at school, a Dudley thing, my cousin, and I was angry, and the water main running under the schoolyard just, it cracked. They attributed it to faulty infrastructure." He looked down. "I know now what it actually was. Emotional amplification is the hardest thing to manage," Percy said, and his voice was completely without judgment. "I flooded a gymnasium once. Middle school. Someone was being horrible to my friend Grover." A pause. "It took me a year to learn the separation between what I feel and what I do with water. They're connected but they're not the same thing. You can feel everything at full intensity and still choose what the water does." "How?" "Anchor," Percy said simply. "Not suppressing it, that makes it worse, because suppressed emotion is still emotion, it just goes sideways. You acknowledge it, I'm furious, I'm scared, this is happening, and then you separate the feeling from the action. The water doesn't control itself based on your feelings. You control it. There's always a choice between the feeling and the response, even when it's fast. It's just a skill." Harry looked at the bowl. He thought about Cedric. He thought about the graveyard. He thought about Sirius in the Department of Mysteries, not calmly, not at a distance. He let himself actually think about it, feel the edges of it, the specific shape of guilt and grief and fury that lived in that memory. The water in the bowl shivered. He felt the water table below him surge slightly, responding to the emotional pull. He breathed out. He separated them, not shut off the feeling, just put a deliberate gap between the feeling and the water, and the bowl went still. The water table subsided. "Good," Percy said quietly. "That was good. It's easier than I expected. It won't always be. But the fact that you can do it cold, first try, on your first intentional attempt," Percy shook his head, and there it was again, that expression of slightly stunned recognition. "You're not learning this stuff, Harry. You're remembering it." The back door opened. Ron came out in his dressing gown, squinting in the morning light, and stopped when he saw the bowl of water floating approximately 18 inches off the ground. Harry had lifted it unconsciously while they were talking. "Morning," Ron said, in the voice of someone who had decided to simply accept whatever was happening. "Morning," Harry and Percy said together. Ron looked at the floating bowl. "Right. I'll make more coffee then." By mid-morning, Hermione had set herself up at the kitchen table with every text Sirius's library contained that was even tangentially relevant to divine heritage and water magic, which was, she informed them at increasing volume, frustratingly little. She'd sent Percy an 11-question list over breakfast, which he'd answered with the patient thoroughness of someone who'd been in this situation with Annabeth and had calibrated his tolerance accordingly. "The problem," Hermione said, appearing in the garden doorway with a quill behind each ear, "is the 400-year gap. When the Ministry severed the official relationship with Olympus in the 1600s, they didn't just stop acknowledging the divine world. They actively removed or reclassified records. There are gaps in the pre-1600 texts that are too systematic to be coincidental. Someone went through and took things out." "What kinds of things?" Percy asked. "References to Thea and Hyma specifically. Any direct discussion of divine soul prints in the wizarding population. Records of interactions between wizards and Olympian entities." She came fully into the garden, notebook in hand. It was a thorough job. But not thorough enough, because the older texts, the pre-1300s ones, in languages the Ministry archivists apparently couldn't read, still have references. And in those references, the name Corvus Vale appears. "Dumbledore mentioned him," Harry said. "Yes, but Dumbledore knows less than he implied, I think. The references I found are," she opened the notebook, disturbing. "Corvus Vale was a wizard born in the late 1600s, which makes him 300 years old," Percy said flatly. "That's not possible for a human." "Not for an ordinary one," Hermione said. "But the texts suggest he found a method of life extension tied to his research into divine soul prints. Specifically, he was trying to, the source uses the word absorb a divine soul print into his own magical core." She looked up. "If he succeeded, even partially, it would extend his life for as long as the divine essence was active. It would also give him access to whatever abilities the soul print carries." "He's been hunting Alcyone's soul," Harry said. "Not a question." "For 300 years, Hermione confirmed. "He's found it before, I think. The records are fragmentary, but there are references to the Seeker coming close in contexts that match previous incarnations." She looked at Harry steadily. "He's never managed to absorb it, obviously, because you exist and the soul is intact. But he's tried." "What stopped him before?" Hermione was quiet for a moment. "The sources say the soul resisted. That it fought. Not the host, the soul itself. That something in Alcyone's fundamental nature rejected the absorption attempt with enough force to," she paused, "to damage the Seeker. Significantly." Percy looked at Harry. Harry was looking at his hands. "Damage Vale," Harry said, slowly. So every time he's tried, in previous incarnations, the soul pushed him back. And he survived. And tried again. 300 years of this. He's patient, Hermione said. And he's had every previous incarnation to study. He knows how the soul behaves now. He knows its patterns. This time, she closed the notebook, he knows about the Gringotts ritual. He'll know the soul is aware of itself. He'll know a guardian has been called. She paused. He'll come soon. Before the soul has time to fully settle into its own power. Then we don't give him the window, Harry said. He said it with such flat certainty that Hermione stopped and looked at him, and Percy watched the look, the particular look of someone who loved the person in front of them and was recalibrating, again, to the version of them they were becoming. Harry, she said. He's been doing this for 300 years. He's patient, he's strategic, and he's coming. Harry met her eyes. So we train faster, we understand more, and we're ready before he expects us to be. And Voldemort is still a problem. 2 problems at once. A slight pause. It won't be the first time. Ron, who'd been leaning against the door frame with his hands around his coffee mug, said, to be clear, we're talking about a 300-year-old wizard who's been hunting Harry's soul specifically, on top of a Dark Lord, on top of Harry having newly awakened sea god powers. Yes, Percy said. And we're 14 and 16. Also yes. Ron looked at his coffee. Good. Good. Just wanted everyone to be on the same page. The first time Harry's powers surfaced publicly and involuntarily happened 4 days into their stay at Grimmauld Place, and it happened because of Mundungus Fletcher, which was the kind of inciting incident that felt, in retrospect, almost satirically mundane. Mundungus was one of the Order members, a Faraday, constantly apologetic man with small quick eyes who smelled of old pipe smoke and moral flexibility. Harry had never particularly trusted him, which turned out to be reasonable, because on Tuesday morning Mundungus casually mentioned, while pouring himself tea at the kitchen table, that he'd heard from a contact in Knockturn Alley that someone had been asking about Harry Potter's blood specifically. Not Harry Potter's location or habits, his blood. Asking how? Sirius said, his voice going cold in the way it did when he was suppressing the urge to do something dramatic. My contact said the bloke was well-dressed. Old. Not old like normal old like preserved. Said his eyes were wrong. Too still. Mundungus shrugged, stirring his tea. My contact got a bad feeling and left. What did he want to know about Harry's blood? Percy asked. Whether it had been, I don't know the term. Activated was the word my contact used. Whether the blood had been activated. The water in every vessel in the kitchen moved simultaneously. Not dramatically, every glass, every mug, the kettle on the stove, the water in the pipes behind the walls, all of it swayed once, like a single pulse from a single source, and then went still. Everyone at the table went very quiet. Harry was standing at the counter with his hands flat on the surface and his expression was a mask of absolute stillness over something that was clearly not still at all. Harry, Percy said, not loud. I'm fine, Harry said, in the voice of someone who was also absolutely not fine but had the situation categorically under control. Your water moved, Ron said. I know. All of it. I know. Harry lifted his hands from the counter and turned around. His face was controlled. His eyes were not, they were very green and very bright, and Percy had learned in 4 days that Harry's eyes did the work his face refused to do. He's been watching for the activation. He was waiting for the ritual. He wanted to know when the soul recognized itself, because that's when it's most accessible, when it's newly aware but not yet fully established. How do you know that? Hermione said. Harry opened his mouth, closed it. I don't know how I know that. I just know it. He paused. Alcyone. Something the soul remembers. The room was quiet. "Then we need to be ready," Sirius said, in the decisive voice he used when sentiment had finished and action was beginning. Today. The training that afternoon was different from the morning sessions. Percy stopped pulling punches. He'd been calibrating, Harry knew, going gentle to understand the parameters before pushing. That ended. They were in the basement of Grimmauld Place, which was long and stone-floored and had clearly been used for something unpleasant in the past, and Percy filled it with water from a conjured source, gallons of it, covering the floor to ankle depth, and Harry felt the moment it arrived like a room lighting up. "Control the room," Percy said, standing at one end. "All of it. Temperature, pressure, movement. Hold it perfectly still." Harry reached out. The water in the room, all of it, every drop, every ripple disturbed by their feet, went flat. Still as glass. The surface reflected the ceiling torches in perfect clarity. Good. Now, Percy moved, quick, and a wave of water surged toward Harry with genuine force. Not a gentle test. Something that would knock him over if he didn't respond. Harry split it. The wave reached him and divided without touching him, flowing around either side and rejoining behind him without a drop on his clothes. Percy grinned. Again. Another wave, from a different angle, faster. Harry redirected it upward. It hit the ceiling and fell back as rain, which was not strictly what he'd been going for, but the ceiling was stone and it didn't matter. "You redirected it instead of blocking it," Percy said. "Blocking is wasteful. You're using force against force. Redirecting uses their energy." Harry looked at the water falling back to the floor. "I'll say anything again. I don't remember learning it, it's a real combat principle. Don't argue with the memory, use it." Percy moved differently now, not generating waves, circling. "What about focused pressure? Not moving water, but compressing it." "Water doesn't compress easily, but with enough force, it becomes something else," Harry said. "A cutting tool. A hammer." "Show me." Harry looked at the water between them. He focused, not on the volume but on a single thin stream, pressurizing it in his mind, feeling the molecular structure of it change under applied force, and sent it at the stone wall. The stone wall had a new groove in it, 2 inches deep, 6 inches long. Percy looked at it. "You just cut stone with water?" "Yes." "First try?" "Yes." Percy was quiet for a moment. Then he said, with an expression Harry was beginning to associate with Percy recalibrating something significant, "Right. I need to stop thinking of you as a student. You can think of me as whatever you want as long as you keep going. What I mean is," Percy gestured at the groove in the wall, "I've been training since I was 12. Intentional training, real training. That trick with the pressurized water took me 18 months. You just did it in 3 seconds because you remembered how." He looked at Harry directly. "What I can actually give you isn't technique. You have technique. What I can give you is context. Frame. The experience of having used this in real situations, against real things that were trying to kill me. That's more valuable," Harry said immediately. "Tell me about Kronos," Harry said, sitting down on the steps at the edge of the flooded room. "Tell me about the Titan War. Not the battle, the before. How you stayed functional when everything was trying to crush you." Percy sat beside him, and the water in the room settled to stillness around them. "You want the honest version or the version that sounds inspiring? Those aren't mutually exclusive for me." Percy looked at him. "Fair enough." He thought for a moment. "I stayed functional because I stopped trying to carry it all at once. The scale of it, a Titan Lord, an army of monsters, Olympus potentially falling, if you look at the whole thing at once, it's paralyzing. You can't fight the whole thing. You fight what's in front of you. You trust the people next to you with the parts you can't see. You do the next right thing and you don't look past it." He paused. And you accept that being scared and being capable are not mutually exclusive. I was terrified for 2 straight years. I was also the person who went into Kronos's army and came out the other side. Both things were true. Harry was quiet. Voldemort has been, the size of it is, I know. He has people. Dozens of them. Some of them are people's parents and uncles and old friends. He gets inside things. He got inside my school twice. He got inside my head. Harry's voice was still even, but Percy had learned to hear what the evenness was covering. There is no version of defeating him that doesn't hurt people I love. There's no clean solution. No, Percy agreed. There usually isn't. How do you be a person after something like that? Percy thought about New York after the Titan War. The crater in Olympus. Bianca. Silena. Charles Beckendorf. He stopped himself, because this wasn't about guilt cataloging. Harry was asking something real. You let the people who love you actually have access to you, he said. That's the main thing. You don't perform being fine. You don't armor it. You let them, he gestured vaguely, in. Harry looked at the water on the floor. I'm not very good at that. I can tell. Percy glanced sideways at him. Get better at it. It's the most important thing. A beat. Also, for what it's worth, you have people. I've been here 5 days, and the way Hermione looks at you when you say something smart, the way Ron laughs at your jokes, those people are in it. Completely. Don't waste that by handling everything alone. I know, Harry said quietly. I know. The evening started ordinary and ended anything but. Dumbledore came for dinner, which Molly Weasley had made despite technically not being there, because she'd arrived at 11 that morning with 6 containers of food and the specific concerned energy of a woman who processed worry through cooking. She'd looked at Percy for a very long time, looked at Harry, and said, "You eat enough?" to Percy, which was not really about Percy and was actually very much about Harry, and Percy had answered for both of them and she'd seemed satisfied. Dinner was loud and warm and had the specific density of a Weasley family table, which Percy had never experienced before but immediately understood why Harry talked about it the way he did. It was a place that felt like permission to relax, and Harry visibly relaxed within it, not completely. Some part of him was always watching exits and tracking the room. Percy had noticed that about him. It was the hypervigilance of someone who'd been caught off guard too many times, but more than he usually did. Dumbledore sat at the far end of the table and mostly listened. After dinner, when the plates had been cleared and Ron and Hermione had predictably gotten into a low-grade argument about Quidditch statistics that was very clearly not about Quidditch statistics, Dumbledore said, "Harry. Percy. I need to tell you something." The table quieted. I made contact today with a scholar who has spent 40 years studying the preministry texts. She's one of perhaps 3 living wizards who still read the old language. Dumbledore folded his hands. She confirmed what Miss Granger has independently found about Corvus Vale. But she told me something additional. Something I think changes the urgency of our situation. Tell us, Harry said. Corvus Vale has not been operating alone. He has been cultivating allies within the wizarding world, not Death Eaters, specifically, and not Voldemort's organization. His own network. People who believe, as he does, that divine blood is the ultimate magical resource, and that the monopolization of it would represent, Dumbledore paused carefully, the end of magical inequality. Hermione looked up. He's framing it as a cause. Precisely. He is an intelligent man who has had 300 years to construct a sophisticated ideology. His followers are not the crude power seekers you find in Voldemort's inner circle. They are scholars, activists, people genuinely angry about systemic inequality in the wizarding world. People with legitimate grievances who have been presented with an illegitimate solution. Dumbledore looked at Harry. And they believe that absorbing the soul of Alcyone would not benefit Vale alone but would, somehow, unlock divine-level magic for all wizards. That's not how souls work, Percy said flatly. No. But it is a compelling promise. Dumbledore met his eyes. It always is. Where is Vale? Harry said. Unknown. But my scholar believes he is in Britain. Has been, 4 months. Possibly years. Dumbledore's eyes were on Harry with that particular weight. He was here before the ritual. He was waiting for it. He didn't start the ritual, Hermione said. Gringotts would have flagged a hereditary anomaly eventually on their own, given vault access patterns, yes. But he positioned himself to be ready when it happened. Dumbledore stood, which signaled the end of the information and the beginning of something more serious. There is one more thing. My scholar, her name is not important, but she has studied Vale extensively. She told me that in every previous attempt, Vale was able to locate the soul because the soul was dormant. It didn't know itself. Didn't resist consciously. He looked at Harry. Now it does. Now you do. That is a significant advantage. It also means he will not use the methods he used before. This time, he will come openly. Good, Harry said. Sirius looked at him sharply. Harry, I mean it. I'm tired of being hunted by things that come from behind. If he's coming openly, I can see him. Harry met Sirius's eyes steadily. I'm not afraid of him. I know you're not. That's not always the same as being ready. Then I'll be ready. It happened 2 nights later. Harry woke at 2 in the morning with the contact stone burning against his palm, not the warm pulse of communication, but heat, actual heat, the kind that carried warning. He was out of bed before he'd finished waking up, wand in his hand, and he knew before he'd crossed the room that there was someone outside. Not inside the wards. Grimmauld Place's wards were old and strong and Dumbledore had reinforced them 3 days ago. But outside them. Clothes. Standing in the street, which a person could do perfectly legally, and the fact that there were wards didn't mean whatever was outside couldn't make itself known. Harry crossed to the window and looked down. The street was empty. But the water in the air was wrong. He could feel it the way you feel a change in barometric pressure, the moisture in the night air moving against its own patterns, being shaped by something external, something that understood water magic well enough to manipulate atmospheric water with intention. Someone was standing in the street doing something with the air's moisture content, and they were very good at it. Percy appeared in the doorway, not stumbling, not sleep-slow. Already awake, already alert, hand on riptide in his pocket. He'd felt it too. Outside, Harry said. I know. Percy crossed to the window, looked down. I can feel the water manipulation. Whoever that is, they've been trained. It's him, Harry said. He was certain, not logically, but in the deep, cellular way of the soul, the kind of certainty that lived below thought. He's introducing himself. Or testing the wards. Or both. Harry moved toward the door. Harry. Percy's voice was even. We don't go out. Not yet. Not in the middle of the night, outside a warded building, without backup, when we don't know what we're walking into. Harry stopped. He knew Percy was right. He also felt the pull of it, the thing in him that was 3,000 years tired of running from Corvus Vale, that wanted to face it, that knew this encounter was coming and didn't want to spend one more night waiting for it. He breathed through it. You're right, he said. I'm aware. Percy joined him at the window, shoulder to shoulder, looking down at the empty street. We wake up Sirius and Dumbledore gets a message tonight. And tomorrow we find out what he actually wants. I know what he wants. We find out what he's offering, Percy corrected. Dumbledore said he has a movement. He doesn't lead a movement by offering nothing. He'll have a proposal. Something he thinks you might listen to. Harry looked at the street. The atmospheric water manipulation had stopped, whatever had been happening down there was over. But the contact stone was still warm. "He's still there," Harry said. "Not doing anything. Just standing there." Introducing himself, Percy repeated. "You were right about that." They stood at the window together for a long time. Nothing moved in the street below. But Harry knew, the way he knew the water table beneath him, the way he knew the Thames at 60 miles, that he was being observed. Not with malice, exactly. With the particular attention of someone who had waited 300 years for a specific thing to happen and was now watching it with the focus of absolute patience. Harry didn't look away. Whoever was down there, in the dark, watching him, he looked back. He looked back without flinching, without the urge to hide, and he let his awareness of the atmospheric moisture between him and the street expand, let it reach, let it find the shape of the thing standing in the dark. He felt a presence. Old. Immensely old for a mortal. Carrying something within it that was dense and layered and not entirely human, the absorbed essence of previous attempts, pieces of things that didn't quite fit in the architecture they'd been forced into. Like a house with rooms built from different centuries. He felt the presence register his awareness. A pause. Then the manipulation of atmospheric water ceased completely, and the street below returned to its ordinary, ambient self. Whoever it was, they'd gone. But before they'd gone, Harry had felt something he hadn't expected. Not threat. Not cruelty. Something much more complicated than either of those things, something that made him stand at the window for a long time after Percy had gone back to his room, thinking. He'd felt recognition. Not warmth, not anything like warmth. But the recognition of a scholar who has spent 300 years studying a subject and has finally, at enormous cost, seen it in person. The recognition of someone for whom this moment was, in its own terrible way, a kind of completion. Corvus Vale had looked up at the window and seen Harry looking back, and whatever he'd felt in that moment, Harry had touched the edge of it through the water between them, and it had been complicated and human and centuries deep. This, Harry thought, was not going to be simple. He'd known that. But feeling it, the weight of a 300-year obsession that had started from a real wound, that had hardened into something dangerous not from malice but from the terrible momentum of too much time and too much wanting, that was different from knowing it intellectually. He stood at the window until the sky began to lighten at its eastern edge, the Thames a very distant hum beneath everything, the water table patient below his feet. He thought about what Percy had said. What he's offering. He thought about Dumbledore's words. People with legitimate grievances who have been presented with an illegitimate solution. He thought about the contact stone, cooling now in his palm, and the name Alcyone, and the weight of 3,000 years moving through him. Then he went downstairs and put the kettle on, and when Hermione came down at 6 and found him at the table with 3 books and a notepad full of notes, she sat across from him without a word and opened her own notebook, and they worked until Percy and Ron came down at 7, and the house woke up around them, and the day began. Downstairs in the kitchen of number 12 Grimmauld Place, the water in every glass moved in a slow, synchronized pulse, not fear, not fury. Something older and steadier than either. Readiness. Chapter 4, The Depths Between Worlds. The map Hermione found was hidden inside a book that wasn't supposed to be a book. It had been sitting on the third shelf of Sirius's library for probably a century, slim, black-spined, titled A Naturalist's Account of Scottish Freshwater Systems in the dull font of something nobody had ever wanted to read. Hermione had pulled it because she pulled everything, and when she'd opened it, the pages inside had nothing to do with freshwater systems. They were hand-drawn charts in ink so old it had gone brown, annotated in 3 languages, Greek, Latin, and a third that Hermione took approximately 4 minutes to identify as Linear B, which was a Bronze Age writing system that had no business being in a Victorian-era binding. She brought it to the kitchen table at 7:30 in the morning and placed it in front of Harry without preamble. "What am I looking at?" Harry said. "A map. Pre-Roman. Possibly pre-Greek in the modern sense. The Linear B annotation dates it to at least 1500 BCE. She turned to a page near the middle of the book. Look at this section. The page showed the Scottish Highlands in unmistakable topographical outline, the shape of the coastline, the loch positions, the mountain ridges, but rendered in a style that predated modern cartography by a considerable margin. Across the central Highland region, a series of symbols had been drawn in a different hand than the rest of the map, and at the center of those symbols was a location marked with a single character, a circle with a vertical line through it, which Hermione had cross-referenced. In Linear B, that symbol denotes a place of divine storage, she said. An archive. A repository of divine record. She looked at Harry. An Olympian archive. Here. In Scotland. Percy had been leaning over the table reading upside down, which was a skill Harry had noticed he possessed and found faintly irritating. I've heard of these, Percy said. Annabeth mentioned them once. Poseidon kept archives of important divine events in locations connected to his power, not on Olympus, because Olympus is too visible, too contested. In the natural world. In deep water. The Highlands are full of lochs, Harry said, already understanding where this was going. Full of very deep lochs, Hermione confirmed. Loch Ness alone goes to over 200 meters. But there are smaller lochs, less famous, less visited, that go significantly deeper. And one of them, she pointed to the symbol on the map, is within 40 miles of Hogwarts. The archive exists, Percy said slowly. Underwater, in a Scottish loch, 40 miles from a school of magic that has existed for 1,000 years. The school didn't choose that location randomly, Hermione said. The founders knew. They built near the archive intentionally, I think. It's mentioned, obliquely, in very old founding records, as a reason the site was chosen. Something about proximity to an ancient source of power. Ron looked at the map from across the table. So we go to Scotland. We go to Scotland, Harry agreed. And we swim to the bottom of a loch. I go to the bottom of a loch, Harry said. The rest of you don't necessarily need to, I can breathe underwater, Percy said. We are all going, Hermione said, in the voice that ended discussions. Ron looked at his toast. Right. Scotland. Getting there required navigating Dumbledore, which Harry had anticipated and planned for, and which went about as well as these things usually went. He told Dumbledore over Fleur that evening, watching the old man's face in the fireplace flames, that pale blue gaze doing its particular trick of looking like it was considering 17 things at once, and Dumbledore said, I see, and then said nothing for long enough that Harry felt the familiar low-grade friction of waiting for someone else to process his information and hand back their decision about it. We're going, Harry said. I want to be clear about that. I'm telling you, not asking. Another pause. I understand. Good. I would like to send someone with you. You can send someone with us. Harry looked directly into the fire. But we're going regardless. Dumbledore looked at him from the flames for a long moment, and Harry waited for the gentle steering, the thoughtful qualification, the impressive architecture of someone moving you toward their preferred outcome while making it feel like your own. It didn't come. What came instead was something that surprised him. You're right to go, Dumbledore said. I should have gone myself, 20 years ago. I knew the archive existed. I told myself I would investigate when circumstances allowed. A slight pause that carried considerable weight. Circumstances did not allow, and I chose not to make them. That was a failure of courage dressed as practicality. His eyes on Harry were direct and, for once, uncushioned. Don't make the same choice I made. Harry nodded. I won't. Alastor Moody will accompany you. He knows the terrain and he is not easily surprised. A beat. Neither are you, I think. Not anymore. No, Harry agreed. Not anymore. Mad-Eye Moody was, Percy decided, the most interesting person he'd met since Chiron, and he'd met an immortal centaur. The man had one magical eye that rotated independently of the other and could apparently see through walls, a wooden leg that didn't slow him down even slightly, and the specific energy of someone who had been in more dangerous situations than could reasonably be survived and had survived all of them through a combination of skill, paranoia, and sheer aggressive competence. He looked at Percy with the magical eye for about 15 seconds when they were introduced, grunted, and said, "Demigod. Poseidon's kid. Fought a Titan lord." He said it the way you'd note that a new colleague had previously worked in a particular field. "Word gets around," Percy said. "My eye does," Moody said, tapping the side of his head. "Sees more than walls." He looked at Harry. "You've unlocked the sea powers." "Yes," Harry said. "Good." He turned and started pulling on his traveling cloak without further ceremony. "We leave at 5 in the morning. I want to be at the lock by noon. Bring warm clothes. Scotland in July is not what Scots will tell you it is." He was entirely correct about that. They traveled by a combination of portkey and very long hike, because the archive's location was apparently beyond the range of most apparition, something to do, Hermione said, with the divine energy at that depth creating interference with spatial magic, which Moody confirmed with a nod and a same principle as Olympus itself, power on that scale bends the rules. The Highlands were extraordinary in a way that bypassed aesthetic appreciation and went directly to something more physical. The scale of it, the long, treeless slopes, the sky pressing close, the silence that wasn't empty but full, thick with weather and age and the sense of land that had been here long before people had had the presumption to name it. Harry walked with his hands out of his pockets and his face in the wind and felt the water everywhere, in the ground, in the air, in the streams cutting down through rock, and it was like walking through something that recognized him. Not dramatically. Just quietly, persistently, the way your own house feels different from everywhere else. Percy fell into step beside him about a mile from the lock. Moody was ahead, moving with surprising speed for a man with a wooden leg. Hermione and Ron were behind them, bickering gently about the proper way to read a topographical map. "You feel it," Percy said. "Not a question." "Everything," Harry said. "The lock is, I can feel it from here. It's deep. Very deep." He paused. "And something else. Something at the bottom that," he stopped, trying to find the right language for it. "It's like feeling a word on the tip of your tongue. Something almost familiar." "The archive." "I think so. I think it knows me. It was made by Poseidon. It would." Percy glanced at him. "How are you with enclosed spaces underwater?" "Fine. I'm fine with all of it, I told you, not asking about the power. Asking about the person." Percy looked at him directly. "Enclosed spaces at depth can mess with your head even if they can't hurt your body. Worth knowing going in." Harry thought about it honestly. He'd been in tight, dark places, the Chamber of Secrets, the tunnels under Hogwarts, the crawl through the Whomping Willow. He hadn't enjoyed any of them but he'd functioned. "I'll be fine," he said. "But thank you for asking." "Don't thank me. Just tell me if it changes." The lock was small by Highland standards, maybe a mile across, shaped like a question mark, tucked between two ridges in a way that hid it from almost every approach. The water was black and still and absolutely silent, and when Harry reached the bank and looked into it, he couldn't see the bottom. He couldn't see anything. The water absorbed light the way the Gringotts lodestone had absorbed light, and standing at its edge felt like standing at the edge of something much larger than it appeared. "How deep?" Ron asked, behind him. "Don't know yet," Harry said. He crouched and put his fingers in the water. The cold was extraordinary, not painful, not for Harry, his water sense immediately calibrating to it the way you calibrate to temperature change, and the moment his fingers touched the surface, something moved. Not in the water, in him. Like a door opening that had been sealed for a very long time, and the seal breaking with the quiet certainty of something that had been waiting for the right key. He felt the archive. It was 230 feet below him, which was far deeper than the lock should have been able to go by any topographical logic, and it felt like a library. Not in the physical sense, he wasn't feeling books and shelves. He was feeling the accumulated weight of stored memory, the particular density of things that had been deliberately preserved across enormous spans of time. It felt ancient and deliberate and achingly patient. 230 feet, he said, standing up. Deeper than it should be by natural measure. The archive is down there, I can feel it. You can feel it from the surface? Hermione said. It's responding to me. He turned to Moody. How long have we got? As long as we need, Moody said, scanning the surrounding hills with his magical eye. I'll keep watch. Nobody knows this place exists except the people in this immediate group and Dumbledore. Harry looked at Percy. Ready? Always. Percy was already pulling off his jacket. I'm coming too, Hermione said, and when Harry opened his mouth, I've taken gillyweed before. Triwizard Tournament, second task, I helped Harry prepare. I know how it works and I have enough for 3. The archive is specifically responsive to divine heritage, Percy said carefully. Then you two can interact with the divine parts and I'll observe the structural parts, Hermione said, with the air of someone who had anticipated this objection and considered it insufficient. Someone needs to document what we find. And I read Linear B. Harry and Percy looked at each other. She's not wrong, Percy said. She's never wrong, Harry said. It's very inconvenient. Ron sat on a rock with the patient air of someone who had made peace with his role in these situations. I'll help Moody keep watch, he said. Don't drown. We literally cannot drown, Harry said. Harry. I know that. I'm saying it anyway because it makes me feel better. Harry looked at him for a moment, at Ron, sitting on a highland rock in the wind with his red hair going in every direction, choosing to be here, choosing always to be here, and meaning it every time, and felt the specific warmth of it, the kind that Percy had told him not to armor against. We'll be back within 2 hours, Harry said. I'll eat lunch without you if you're late, Ron said. Don't test me. The gillyweed worked exactly as advertised, the gills appearing behind Harry's ears with a peculiar sensation that he filed under odd but manageable, his hands and feet webbing slightly, his whole relationship with the cold water changing from endurance to preference within about 30 seconds of submersion. For Harry it was layered on top of his existing water sense, which meant the experience of going under was, extraordinary wasn't quite right. It was like putting on glasses when you've been squinting your whole life and realizing the world has always been this detailed. He could feel everything. Every current at every depth, the temperature gradients layered one below the other, the particular quality of the water changing as they descended, older, stiller, the surface world receding above them into a dim greenish ceiling and then nothing. Percy was on his right, moving with the ease of someone for whom this was home. Hermione was on his left, moving more deliberately but competently, a waterproof notebook already in her hand. The archive announced itself at 150 feet. Not visually, there was nothing to see yet, just the increasing dark of deep water and the pale bioluminescent quality of the water itself, which Harry noticed was faintly glowing, the particles of it catching light that had no obvious source. But his awareness of it sharpened dramatically, the sense of stored memory becoming less ambient and more directional. There, directly below. Waiting. At 200 feet, he could see it. It was built into the lock's floor, which at this depth was solid rock, and it extended perhaps 30 feet in diameter, circular, made of stone that was darker than the surrounding rock face, carved with the same interlocking circular patterns Harry had seen on the Gringotts basin but larger, far larger, some of the carvings a foot across. At its center was an entrance, a circular opening about 6 feet in diameter, perfectly smooth-edged, leading into a space that shouldn't have been able to exist in solid rock. The stone around the entrance was glowing. Faintly, unevenly, the glow pulsing in a rhythm Harry recognized immediately. It matched the contact stone. It matched his heartbeat. It matched the pulse he'd felt since the Gringotts ritual, the one that had been getting stronger every day. He swam to the entrance and went through without stopping. Inside was the most disorienting space Harry had ever been in, and he'd been in some genuinely disorienting spaces. The chamber was dry, absolutely, impossibly dry, the water simply not entering past the threshold, held back by some principle he couldn't immediately explain and decided not to examine right now. The air inside was cold and tasted old, the specific staleness of a sealed space, but breathable. The bioluminescent glow was stronger here, emanating from channels cut into the walls and floor, mapping the same circular patterns as the exterior but in 3 dimensions, turning the interior into something that looked like a star chart rendered in architecture. Hermione surfaced beside him. The entrance was in the floor of the chamber, an opening that worked like a moon pool, water below and dry air above. She pulled herself up, shook water from her hair, and immediately looked at the walls with an expression that Harry recognized as the Hermione Granger equivalent of rapture. Percy came up on the other side, looked around, and said quietly, "I've heard about these." Annabeth described them. She said they were the closest thing to being inside a god's memory. "That's what this is," Harry said. "Isn't it? It's his memory." The walls, he was realizing, were not just carved. They were animated, not moving, exactly, but containing something that images contained when they were more than images. Scenes. Frozen moments in what looked like narrative sequence, running from one section of wall to the next in a continuous, circular story. Hermione went straight to the nearest wall with her notebook. Harry went to the beginning. He found it instinctively, the first panel in the sequence, where the story started, and he knew it was the first because looking at it produced a sensation in his chest like a key turning in a very old lock. The image showed a shoreline, ancient, nothing recognizable, and a figure standing in the water, and above the figure, barely outlined in the carved stone but unmistakably present, the shape of something vast and oceanic watching from the depths offshore. Poseidon, watching his son. The figure in the water was young, Harry's age, maybe younger, lean and dark-haired, standing in the sea with his arms at his sides and his face turned up, and around him the water was doing things that water did not do ordinarily. Rising in columns, moving in patterns, responding to the figure the way Harry's water responded to him. "That's," Percy said, from over Harry's shoulder. "Me," Harry said. "That's the first one. Alcyone." He touched the carving without thinking. The panel lit up under his fingers, not just the bioluminescent channel glow, but a warmer light, golden-tinted, spreading outward from his fingertips through the circular channels in the stone, running along the wall in both directions, illuminating section after section of the archive story. Hermione made a sound that was half gasp and half scholarly excitement, which in practice sounded like a very compressed "oh." "The whole room just lit up," Percy said. "I know." Harry's hand was still flat on the panel. He could feel the archive the way he could feel deep water, all of it, the full extent of it, the record it contained pressing up through the stone into his palm like information that had been waiting this exact duration for exactly this retrieval. It was waiting for me. He moved along the wall, and the story moved with him. He learned things in the next hour that no book had ever recorded and no living person could have told him. Alcyone, the first one, 3,000 years ago, had not died in battle. He had not been killed by a monster or a rival demigod or the political machinations of Olympus, though Olympus had its politics and they were not gentle. He had died trying to do something that should have been impossible, seal a rift in the boundary between the mortal world and Tartarus itself, a rift that had been tearing wider for a decade and that, if it had fully opened, would have ended everything long before Troy ever fell. He'd succeeded. He'd sealed the rift. And in sealing it, he'd put so much of his divine essence into the seal itself that what remained wasn't enough to keep a body living. He'd simply run out. Poseidon had caught him as he fell. Harry stood at that panel for a long time. The image was not sentimental, it was carved in the spare, clean lines of very old art, no flourish, no drama. Just the god's hands and the figure falling and the sealed rift in the background, glowing faintly, whole. He'd saved the world before anyone called it that. Harry, Hermione said, from further down the wall. He came to her. She was standing in front of a section of carving that was different from the rest, not narrative, not scenes, but text. Dense, layered, running in concentric circles, the outermost ring in linear B and the inner rings in progressively older scripts that Hermione was already transcribing with focused ferocity. "This is a record of the subsequent incarnations," she said. "It's, Harry, there are 23. 23 times this soul has been born since Alcyone died. I can see dates, rough ones, by cultural reference, going back to approximately 800 BCE, and then forward. There are gaps where the soul apparently spent time between lives. But 23 times it's come back." 23, Percy said. "The most recent one before you," Hermione traced down the innermost ring, "was in the 1940s. Brief life. Ended violently." She looked up at Harry with careful eyes. "During the Second World War. The fates kept sending it back," Harry said. "Into situations that needed world sealing," Percy said quietly. "Every time the world needs sealing, they send you back." Harry looked at him. Percy was not being dramatic, it was a plain statement of what the evidence showed, and the expression on his face was not pity but something closer to recognition. The recognition of someone who understood being the person the world sent in when things needed sealing. "And now Voldemort," Harry said. "And now Vale," Hermione added. "Who has been tracking the soul across at least 8 of these incarnations, based on what the text describes. It calls him," she looked at her notes, "the Malevos Kataticas. The wrongful seeker. Someone who has been pursuing the soul not to destroy it but to claim it. Absorb the archive. Access the seal. He doesn't just want the power," Percy said, and his voice had gone still in the way it did when he was working something out. "He wants the seal. The Tartarus seal." Alcyone died making more actions request aborted. Write the next chapter now. Chapter 5. All the things we drowned. Annabeth Chase arrived at Grimmauld Place on a Wednesday morning with a duffel bag, a rolled architectural blueprint under one arm, and the particular expression of someone who had assessed a situation from the outside for as long as they were willing to and was now coming in. Percy opened the front door and she looked at him for exactly 1 second before she said, "You should have called me 2 weeks ago." "I know. I had to hear about it from Chiron, who heard about it from a Nereid, who heard about it from the Atlantic Current, Percy." "The Atlantic Current. The divine communication network is very decentralized. That's not the point." She stepped past him into the hallway, looked up at the house's dark walls and grim chandeliers with the practiced eye of someone who was already cataloging structural deficiencies, and said, "Where's Harry?" "Kitchen." "Good. I have questions. He'll be thrilled to hear that." She stopped and looked at Percy properly, the full look, the one she reserved for when she was checking that he was actually all right and not just performing all right, which were 2 things Percy had historically confused. He let her look. He'd learned, over the years of knowing her, that resisting the look was both futile and counterproductive. "You're good," she said. "Not a question." "I'm good," he confirmed. "This one's different, Annabeth. I don't mean easier. I mean, I know what I'm here for. It's specific and real and it makes sense." He paused. "It's the first thing in a while that's felt like it fits." She held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once, and that was that, and they went to the kitchen. Harry was at the table with Hermione, working through the transcriptions from the archive, which had occupied both of them in every available hour since Scotland. The archive text had given them an enormous amount of information and an enormous number of new questions, which was the nature of archives. They answered the questions you came with and replaced them with better ones. Harry looked up when Annabeth walked in and she looked at him the way she looked at things she was seriously evaluating, directly, thoroughly, without social performance. "Annabeth Chase," Percy said. "Daughter of Athena. Architect." She's the smartest person I've ever met, and I want you to know I mean that without any qualification." "He absolutely means it," Harry said, extending his hand. "Harry Potter. Apparently I've been alive for 3,000 years. Annabeth shook his hand, and her eyes were gray and sharp and genuinely interested. "I know. I've read everything Hermione's sent." She glanced at Hermione. "Your linear B transcription has 2 errors in the 3rd concentric ring, by the way. The symbol you read as archive is actually closer to vessel, the distinction matters contextually." Hermione opened the transcription immediately. "Where exactly?" "Page 4, line 8, and page 7, line 3. Annabeth sat down with the ease of someone taking the seat they intended to occupy for a while. "The full reading changes the implication of that section. It's not just a record of where the seal is stored. It's a description of what the seal does to the soul that made it." She looked at Harry. "The seal is still active. Alcyone's divine essence, the piece of it that went into the rift 3,000 years ago, is still powering it. Continuously. Every incarnation, whether you know it or not, you are actively maintaining the seal." The kitchen was quiet. "Maintaining it how?" Harry asked. "The soul reinvests essence continuously. It's involuntary, you don't have to do anything, it happens as a function of existing. But the archive describes it as a drain. Not a catastrophic one. More like a background cost." She set the blueprint down on the table. "Which explains why the soul keeps being reincarnated. It can't stop cycling, because the seal needs ongoing maintenance and the soul is the only power source that works. The fates aren't sending you back for poetic reasons. They're sending you back because the seal requires it." "Vale wants the seal," Harry said. "Vale wants control of the seal," Annabeth corrected. "There's a difference. If he absorbs enough of the soul's essence, not all of it, he can't take all of it without destroying it and collapsing the seal, but enough, he becomes the secondary power source. He ties himself to the seal. And the seal, by the archive's description, is essentially indestructible and eternal." She let that land. "He's not trying to live forever by ordinary dark magic. He's trying to live forever by becoming structurally necessary to the universe." Ron put down his mug very slowly. "He wants to become load-bearing," he said. Annabeth looked at him. "That is exactly the right framing, actually. I have my moments." "The problem," Harry said, working through it, "is that if he gets that connection to the seal, the soul can't be reincarnated without him. He'd be woven into the cycle. Every future life I have, he'd be there." "Yes," Annabeth said. "And conversely, every attempt to stop him risks damaging the seal, which ends everything," Percy said flatly. "Same as what Alcyone died to prevent." "He's using the seal as a shield," Harry said quietly. "As long as the seal is necessary, he is by extension necessary. You can't destroy him without risking the rift. Which is why he survived every previous attempt to stop him," Hermione said, looking at her transcription with new eyes. "The soul pushed him back, but never fully destroyed him. Because it couldn't. Because the cost was too high." "That's not going to be true this time," Harry said. Everyone looked at him. "This is the first time the soul has been fully awake," Harry said. "All the previous incarnations, they pushed Vale back on instinct, on soul-deep reflex. They didn't understand the mechanism. They didn't know what the seal was or how it worked." He looked at Annabeth. "Now we know. And knowing the mechanism means we can find a solution that doesn't require destroying him. A way to detach him from the seal, or prevent the attachment from being made in the first place, without collapsing it." Annabeth was already looking at the blueprint she'd brought. "I've been working on that," she said. "Since Chiron briefed me 4 days ago." She unrolled the blueprint on the table, and Harry saw immediately that it wasn't an architectural plan for a building but a diagram, the seal structure, as best Annabeth had reconstructed it from the archive descriptions, rendered in precise geometric form. The central circle was the rift. The lines radiating outward were the soul's investment. The annotations were in 3 languages including Ancient Greek, and the margins were dense with calculations. If the soul's investment is continuous and involuntary, Annabeth said, then it functions like a current. And a current can be redirected. She tapped the central circle. If we can create a secondary anchor for the seal, something of equivalent divine weight that could share the maintenance load, then the soul's investment decreases. If it decreases enough, it breaks below the threshold veil needs to absorb. Not destroy him, Percy said. Starve the attempt. Exactly. He can try to absorb something that's carrying 40% of its original divine signature instead of 100. At 40%, there's not enough to make a functional connection to the seal. She looked at Harry. And at 40%, you're still fully operational, because you don't actually need 100% to live your life. The archive says the maintenance cost is maybe 20–25% of total capacity on a continuous basis. The rest is yours. What creates a secondary anchor? Harry asked. What has equivalent divine weight? Annabeth and Percy exchanged a look. Another divine entity voluntarily investing in the seal, Annabeth said. The archive is very specific, it has to be voluntary. Forced investment doesn't hold. Poseidon, Harry said. He's already connected to the seal obliquely, through you. A direct investment from him would be, Annabeth made a note on the blueprint, more than sufficient. It would bring the soul's mandatory contribution down to negligible levels. I'll ask him, Harry said simply. Just like that? Ron said. He's already watching. Harry glanced at the window, where rain had started against the glass, moving in the particular pattern Harry had come to recognize as not entirely meteorological. He's been watching since Scotland. He addressed the window directly. Hasn't he? The rain on the glass moved in a deliberate circle and then went back to ordinary rain. Right, Ron said. Of course he has. Nico D'Angelo appeared in the drawing room at noon on Thursday, stepping out of a shadow in the corner that definitely hadn't had sufficient depth for a person to emerge from. He was pale, dark-haired, dressed in black with the specific intensity of someone who wore it for reasons and not as an aesthetic choice, and he looked younger than his 14 years and older than most adults simultaneously. Percy's face did something complicated when he saw him, the complicated thing of someone navigating a relationship that contained both genuine warmth and genuine history, not all of it easy. Nico, he said. Percy. Nico looked at him for a moment, then looked at the room, at Harry and Annabeth and Hermione and Ron, cataloguing the whole of it with eyes that were darker than they had any right to be. The shadow currents have been strange for 3 weeks. Since the Gringotts ritual. He said it to Percy, but he was looking at Harry. Reincarnation creates disturbances in the boundary between the living world and elsewhere. 23 times is a significant enough number that the disturbance is visible. To people like me. People like you being, Ron started. Son of Hades, Percy said. Ghost King. He can travel through shadows and communicate with the dead and is generally the most unsettling person I've ever met, which is saying something given my life experience. That's a very reductive summary, Nico said. Is it inaccurate? A pause. No. Harry had been watching Nico since he'd arrived, which Nico had clearly noticed and which he didn't seem bothered by. There was a quality to him that Harry recognized, the particular isolation of someone who'd spent years being more than they were supposed to be and not entirely welcome for it. Harry knew that from the inside. The disturbance in the boundary, Harry said. What does it look like from your end? Nico turned to him directly. Like something knocking. From this side, trying to get back in. Not your soul, the soul is stable, I've checked the relevant records on my father's side. He paused. Veil has been disturbing the boundary. He's been in contact with something in the in-between space. Something he shouldn't be able to access unless he had. Nico stopped. What? Annabeth said. Unless he had pieces of soul that weren't properly his, Nico said carefully. Fragments. If he's been absorbing traces of Alcyone's soul from previous incarnations, insufficient to make the seal connection, but not nothing, those fragments aren't fully alive and aren't fully dead. They exist in the in-between space and they're responsive to him. He's been using them as a communication channel. He's been talking to the dead pieces of Harry's past lives, Percy said. Gathering information about the soul's behavior patterns, Annabeth said, and she was already writing on the blueprint. That's how he's been refining his approach across 300 years. It's not just patience and observation. He's been actively mining the historical data. Can that channel be severed? Harry asked Nico. Nico looked at him. Yes. But it would require going into the in-between space, finding the fragments, and essentially, completing them. Giving them enough integrity that they can properly pass on instead of remaining accessible to him. He paused. Someone with a direct relationship to those fragments would have to do it. Everyone looked at Harry. You're saying I need to go talk to my dead past selves, Harry said. I'm saying pieces of them are caught between living and dead and the only person who can free them is the soul they're part of. Nico said it flatly, without drama. I can take you. I've done more complicated things. When? After the attack on Hogwarts, Nico said. The room went very still. After the what? Moody said, from the doorway, where he'd apparently been standing for some time. His magical eye was fixed on Nico. The shadow currents have been building toward Hogwarts for 4 days, Nico said. Whatever Vale is planning, it's happening soon. Probably within 48 hours. He looked at Harry. He's done gathering information. He's decided to come get what he wants. Why Hogwarts? Hermione said. Why not here, or, because Hogwarts sits on a convergence point, Annabeth said, already looking at her blueprint with new intensity. It was built near the archive. The archive is connected to the seal. The convergence of divine energy there is, it's the place where the seal's influence on the surface world is most concentrated. If he wants to make his connection attempt, he needs proximity to the convergence point. She looked up. He's not attacking Hogwarts. He's using Hogwarts as the location for a ritual. The school is just where everything he needs happens to intersect. Then that's where we go, Harry said. He was already standing, already moving the way he moved when something had been decided, not hurried, not agitated, the settled forward motion of someone who had stopped waiting. Term doesn't start for another 6 weeks, Hermione said. Dumbledore maintains a presence at Hogwarts year-round, Harry said. And we need the proximity to the convergence point as much as Vale does. He looked around the room, at Percy, at Annabeth, at Nico, at Ron and Hermione and Moody. He's been 3 steps ahead for 300 years because the soul was always reacting. We're not reacting this time. He looked at Annabeth's blueprint. We're going to be there first. There's the small issue of Voldemort, Moody said. Voldemort is a separate problem, Harry said. He's not connected to Vale's plan. Their goals are completely different. Voldemort wants me dead, Vale wants me preserved, which means for the duration of this they are actively working against each other, and that is something we can use. Moody looked at him with his normal eye and his magical eye simultaneously, which was an expression that had no comfortable human equivalent. You've been thinking about this, he said. I've been thinking about this for 3 weeks, Harry said. Since the moment I read that Vale needed the soul intact to make his connection. He looked at Moody directly. Voldemort is an asset in this scenario. Not an ally, I'm not suggesting we work with him. But his existence creates a threat to Vale that Vale has to account for. That's pressure on Vale's timeline. That's complexity in his planning. And complexity creates gaps. The room was quiet. Moody's magical eye slowly rotated. "Right," Moody said. "Right, yes. We go to Hogwarts." They arrived at Hogwarts at twilight, which Harry had always thought was the best time to see it, the castle catching the last light in a way that made it look like something that was lit from inside rather than from outside, which in a very literal sense it was. He'd stood at the edge of the grounds and looked at it dozens of times, but this time was different in a way he felt clearly. The convergence point Annabeth had described was not abstract. He could feel it from the gates, a concentrated hum of something beneath and around the castle, running in the ground and up through the walls and in the lock beside it, Poseidon's lock, and Harry thought, of course. Of course the founders built here. Of course this particular piece of Scottish geography had called to people who worked with magic. The archive at the bottom of the nearby lock and the convergence point at Hogwarts were two aspects of the same deep structure, and standing at the gate feeling both of them simultaneously was like, finally hearing a word pronounced correctly after years of seeing it only in print. Dumbledore met them in the entrance hall. He'd been there since Moody had sent word ahead, and he looked at Harry with the careful attention of someone who was watching a person become something and having complex feelings about it. "Percy tells me you have a plan," Dumbledore said. "The beginning of one," Harry said. "It needs your help and it needs Poseidon's help and it needs everything Annabeth's been working on." He paused. "And it needs you to trust me to make certain decisions without checking them against your judgment first." Dumbledore held his gaze. "Specifically? When Vale arrives, I lead the response. Not you. Not Moody. Me." A long pause. The entrance hall was very quiet, the castle settling around them in the particular way it settled in summer when there were no students, the sounds of stone and old wood contracting in the cooling evening air. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "All right." Harry hadn't expected it to be that easy. He looked at Dumbledore with something approaching surprise. "I told you the night before you left for Scotland," Dumbledore said quietly. "I chose practicality over action once too often with this particular matter. I don't intend to repeat the error." He glanced at the others, then back at Harry. "Also, and I say this with complete sincerity, watching you work over the past 3 weeks has made it very clear that deferring to you is not a compromise. It is simply the correct choice." Harry didn't know what to do with that, so he nodded and moved on, which was the appropriate response. They had 24 hours. Annabeth turned them into the most productive 24 hours Harry could remember, which was impressive given her competition. She walked the castle with the focused energy of someone reading a building the way others read books, not looking at it aesthetically but structurally, functionally, asking what it was doing and why. She found the convergence point's physical center, the astronomy tower, which Harry had always felt was significant without knowing why, and mapped the lines of divine energy running outward from it through the castle's foundations. She redesigned the defensive formation of their group around those lines, placing people not where conventional tactics would put them but where the architecture of the convergence gave them natural amplification. Hermione worked with her, cross-referencing the archive transcription with Annabeth's structural findings, and the two of them developed a specific, detailed understanding of how Vale's ritual would work, what he needed, in what sequence, and where the gaps were. Nico sat in a corner of the astronomy tower's base and said very little, which Percy told Harry meant he was doing something important that didn't require an audience. Harry accepted this. Ron and Percy ran combat scenarios in the courtyard, which was both useful and genuinely entertaining to watch, because Percy approached fighting with a kind of casual inventiveness that Ron matched with persistent, determined competence, and watching the two of them work together had the specific satisfaction of seeing two very different people find an unexpected common rhythm. Harry spent the 24 hours doing something that looked, to an outside observer, like nothing. He sat in various parts of the castle, alone, and he deepened. That was the only word for it. He'd been expanding his water sense in careful increments since Grimmauld Place, testing the edges of it, understanding the parameters. Now he stopped being careful. He sat in the center of the convergence point's influence and he let himself feel everything, the lock beside the castle, 40 feet away and 80 feet deep, the archive 2 miles north and 230 feet down, the water table running beneath the foundations, the moisture in the castle walls, the highland sky heavy with rain that hadn't fallen yet, the Atlantic at the coast, 100 miles west, and beneath all of it, enormous and patient and absolutely certain, Poseidon's presence in the deep structure of it all, not speaking, not directing, just there. Just there the way a father is there when they're in the same building and not in the same room. Presently, warmly, completely. Harry sat with it and let it fill him to his actual size. Then he reached out, not physically, not even through the water sense exactly, but in the way you reach for someone standing next to you, and felt Poseidon's attention focus. He said, without words, because this kind of communication didn't use them, Annabeth's plan needs you. The secondary anchor. I need to know if you'll do it. The response came through the lock, through the ground, through the water in the castle walls, arriving everywhere simultaneously. Ask me properly, Alcyone. I've been waiting 30 centuries for you to ask me for something. Harry felt something he hadn't expected to feel, the particular sting of something that had been held at arm's length finally being held, which didn't feel like gentleness so much as an opening, a space becoming available that had been closed for a very long time. He said, properly and out loud to the empty room, help me. The castle shuddered once, very slightly. The lock outside, visible through the window, was briefly lit from below. Then it settled. It was enough. He knew it was enough. The secondary anchor was established. Vale came at midnight. Not through the gates, the wards would have held against a direct magical approach. He came through the water. Not Harry's water, not Poseidon's water, his own, the absorbed trace fragments of 3,000 years of pursuit, the pieces of previous incarnations that Nico had described as caught between living and dead. He used them as a key, feeding them through the castle's water systems, and the castle felt it as a corruption, a wrong note in the convergence point's hum, and every enchanted surface in the astronomy tower flickered simultaneously. Harry was already there. He'd felt it coming for 3 minutes before it arrived, the approach of something that knew the soul's signature intimately and was using that knowledge as a compass. He felt Vale the way you feel weather coming, distant at first, then closer, then here. Percy was on his left. Annabeth and Hermione were at the tower's base with the structural diagram, ready to activate Annabeth's disruption sequence at Harry's signal. Ron and Moody were on the stairs, covering the approach. Nico was in the shadow of the tower's east wall, present in the particular way he was present when he wasn't entirely on this side of the boundary. Corvus Vale came up through the astronomy tower's floor as though the stone were water. He was, and Harry registered this with the clarity of actually seeing something after knowing its shape from description, extraordinary. Not in a way that could be straightforwardly opposed or simply feared. He was tall, thin, white-haired, with the particular bearing of someone who had been genuinely brilliant for a very long time. His face was old in a way that was different from Dumbledore's old, where Dumbledore's age had worn into warmth, Vale's had worn into something else. Not cruelty. Something sadder than cruelty. The specific exhaustion of someone who has wanted one thing for so long that the wanting has hollowed out everything else and they are no longer fully aware it has happened. His eyes were what Mundungus's contact had described, too still. Not empty, very full, actually, full of intelligence and intensity and the accumulated weight of 3 centuries. But still in the manner of something that had given up expecting to be surprised. He looked at Harry and was immediately surprised. "You're awake," Vale said. Not shocked, more like a scholar finding a specimen behaving in a new way. Fascinated. Harry held his gaze. "You know what I am," Harry said. "I have spent 300 years learning what you are." Vale's voice was measured, precise, the voice of someone who had rehearsed this conversation in 100 different forms and was now departing from all of them because the person in front of him wasn't any of the versions he'd prepared for. "You are the soul of the first son of Poseidon. The maker of the seal that has held the boundary between this world and Tartarus for 30 centuries. The most significant magical entity on this planet. He paused. And you're 14. It's a current body, Harry said. It's not the sum of me. Vale looked at him with an expression that was, Harry recognized with some discomfort, close to respect. No, he said. I can see that. Percy, on Harry's left, was completely still. Watching. Ready. He wasn't going to move unless Harry moved first, which Harry understood and appreciated as the genuine version of what a Kipos was supposed to be. You know why I'm here, Vale said. I know everything about why you're here, Harry said. I've had 3 weeks with an Olympian archive and an extremely thorough group of people. Then you know I'm not your enemy in the way Voldemort is your enemy. I know your goals don't include my death, yes. That doesn't make you someone I'm going to let within 10 feet of my soul's divine signature. Harry paused. Tell me about the rift. Something moved across Vale's face, surprise again, deeper this time. You know about the rift. I know what Alcyone died making. I know you want to tie yourself to the seal that was made with his death. I know you've been using the soul fragments from previous incarnations as an intelligence network. Harry kept his voice level, factual, the way Percy had described keeping combat, feeling everything but choosing the response. And I know why you started. Tell me. Vale was quiet for a long moment. The castle settled around them. The convergence point hummed beneath everything, steady and deep. Outside, the lock was perfectly still. You looked into the archive, Vale said. Thoroughly. Then you know the seal is weakening, Vale said, and his voice changed. The careful, constructed quality of it dropped, and what was underneath was not the voice of a villain explaining his agenda. It was the voice of someone who was genuinely, deeply afraid of something specific and had been for a very long time. The rift has been reforming. Slowly, 15 years ago it was barely detectable. 10 years ago I could measure it. 5 years ago, he stopped. The seal Alcyone made was perfect. But nothing is permanent under enough pressure, and whatever is pushing from the other side of that rift has been pushing for 3,000 years, and the soul is not cycling fast enough to reinvest at the necessary rate. Harry held his gaze. You're telling me the seal is failing. I'm telling you it will fail. Not today. Not this year. Perhaps not for another century. But it will fail, and when it does, Vale's still eyes were not still anymore, everything Alcyone died to prevent will happen. And this time there will be no one to seal it, because the cycle has not produced the necessary accumulation of power to do it twice. The silence in the astronomy tower was the most complete silence Harry had ever been in. That's why you want the connection to the seal, Harry said. Not accusation. Understanding. Not immortality. Not power. You want to be an additional maintenance source. Because you've been watching the seal for 300 years and you've become genuinely, actually terrified that no one else is paying attention. I am the only mortal who knows the rift exists, Vale said. I know now. You are 14 and you will be dead before it becomes critical. Then I'll be 45 in the next incarnation and I'll know again, Harry said. Because now it's in the archive. Now there's a record. This conversation is already part of it. He didn't know that, but he felt it, felt the archive responding, felt the record extending in the way records extended when something significant was added to what they contained. The glow from the lock's direction pulsed once. Vale looked toward the window. He felt it too. You asked Poseidon, he said quietly. He's the secondary anchor now, Harry said. Annabeth's solution. The soul's mandatory maintenance contribution is now negligible. You don't need to absorb any of it to supplement the seal has a full power source independent of me. He watched Vale's face process this. The thing you've been working toward for 300 years, the seal being inadequately powered, it's been addressed. Without you. The silence stretched. Prove it, Vale said, and his voice was barely above a whisper. Harry reached, not outward, but down and across, into the convergence point, along the lines of divine energy running through the castle's foundations, and he found the secondary anchor exactly where it had established itself, warm and immense and absolutely solid. He fed Vale's awareness toward it, not through words but through the water in the air between them, the same water he'd used to read Vale's presence in the street outside Grimmauld Place. Vale felt it. Harry watched him feel it, watched 300 years of desperate, obsessive, entirely solitary vigilance make contact with something that told it, "We know. We have it. You can let go." He'd expected relief. Instead, Vale's face crumpled into something much more complicated than relief. He'd spent 300 years being the only person who knew the world was in danger. He'd made himself into a monster by mortal standards, had gathered followers under a false flag, had pursued a child's soul across incarnations with relentless intent. He'd done it all because no one else was paying attention and he was too intelligent and too stubborn and too frightened to stop. And now someone had paid attention. And it was handled. And the 300 years collapsed into the moment. "It's enough," Harry said, and his voice was, not gentle exactly, but human. Honest. "You can stop." Vale looked at him for a long time. The two still eyes were not still at all. Then something in the room shifted, the particular shift of a situation that has been building toward violence and then doesn't go there, the energy released sideways into something else entirely. Percy, on Harry's left, exhaled a very quiet breath. Annabeth, at the base of the tower, lowered her hands from the disruption sequence. "Your followers," Harry said. "The people you gathered under the equality argument. Some of them had genuine grievances." "All of them had genuine grievances," Vale said, and it was the first thing he'd said with something like dignity. "Those grievances are real," Harry said. "The magical inequality in this world is real. The Ministry's handling of it is inadequate and has been for decades." He paused. "That problem doesn't go away because you stop pursuing me. But it also doesn't get solved by soul absorption." "No," Vale agreed. "Then there's a different conversation to be had. About the actual problem. With people who have the ability to do something about it." He looked at Vale steadily. "That conversation needs you alive and not in a ministry holding cell. Can you work with that?" Vale stared at him. 300 years old, white-haired, hollowed out by want and by time, standing in an astronomy tower at midnight looking at a 14-year-old boy who was something much older than his face. "You're offering me a way out," Vale said. "I'm offering the situation a way forward," Harry said. "Which is different. Whether you're in it or not is your choice." Nico moved, then, stepped out of the shadow of the east wall with the quiet certainty of someone who had been waiting for a specific moment and recognized its arrival. He looked at Vale with the dark, knowing eyes of someone who spent a lot of time at the boundary between living and dead. "The fragments," Nico said to Vale. "The pieces of previous incarnations you've been holding in the in-between space. Release them." Vale turned to look at him. Something passed between them, the particular recognition of two people who understood the same landscape, who'd been navigating the space between living and dead from opposite directions. "They've been there a long time," Vale said. "I know," Nico said. "Let them go anyway." Vale closed his eyes. When he opened them, Harry felt it, a release, somewhere below the surface of things, the soul-deep sensation of something being unknotted. Not dramatically. Like a breath being let out after being held too long. The fragments went free. Harry felt them go, 23 lives worth of trapped pieces, moving through the in-between space toward wherever they were supposed to go next, and as they moved he felt each one for just a moment, the way you feel a word before it slips from memory. Brief, complete, gone. Lives and deaths and choices and the particular shapes different people made of the same essential soul. He felt Alcyone last, the first one, the original, and that touch was different from the others. Not a fragment, not a trapped piece. The full weight of that first life, held across 30 centuries in the archive and the seal and the deep structure of the ocean itself, and it moved through him not like something releasing but like something recognizing. He felt, for one full second, what it had been like to stand at the edge of the rift and know what needed to be done and do it anyway. Then it was gone, and Harry was standing in the astronomy tower of Hogwarts in July, 14 years old, barefoot on the stone, with Percy on his left and the castle alive around him and the lock glowing quietly outside the window. He was crying, which he hadn't expected, and which he decided not to manage or explain. Vale looked at him and looked away, which was the courteous response. "What happens now?" Vale asked. "Now?" Harry wiped his face with the back of his hand. "Now Moody takes you somewhere you can be held without it being a ministry cell, Dumbledore figures out the legal scaffolding, and we have a very long conversation about the equality problem." He looked at Vale. "But first I need about 6 hours of sleep, because it has been an incredibly full night." Percy made a sound that was almost a laugh. "And your Voldemort problem," Vale said. "I'm aware of it," Harry said. "I have information about his current organization that the Order of the Phoenix doesn't. I've been watching the whole board, not just my section of it." He paused. "If there's a different conversation to be had, I'd like to be useful in it." Harry looked at him for a long moment. "One thing at a time," he said. "Starting with, are you going to give Moody trouble?" Vale looked at Moody, who had appeared on the tower stairs at some point in the last 10 minutes and was regarding Vale with the maximally suspicious attention of his magical eye. "No," Vale said. "Good." Harry turned to Percy. "You all right?" "I haven't done anything for the last hour except stand very still and be ready," Percy said. "That was important." "I know it was. I'm just saying, as a personal observation, that being ready without acting is not my strongest skill and I'm proud of myself for managing it." He paused. "Also, are you actually all right?" "The crying thing, the fragments," Harry said. 23 lives saying goodbye. I didn't expect it to, I mean." He stopped. Started again. 3,000 years is a long time to have been someone. Percy was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, it is." They stood together in the astronomy tower while Moody dealt with Vale, while Annabeth and Hermione came up the stairs already comparing notes with the focused collaboration of two people who'd been circling each other's intellectual orbit for weeks and were now in direct contact, while Ron appeared with biscuits he'd apparently found in Dumbledore's office which no one asked about, while Nico faded back into the shadow of the east wall and watched everyone with the ancient and young eyes. The castle was quiet. The lock was still. The convergence point hummed beneath everything, steady and warm, and now there were two notes in it where there had been one, the soul's own note and the deeper resonance of something oceanic, vast, and permanent. The secondary anchor, holding its share of the weight without effort, the way deep things held weight. Outside, the first gray light of dawn was touching the eastern ridge. Harry stood at the astronomy tower window and felt all of it, the archive, the seal, the lock, the water table, the distant Atlantic, the water in the castle's stones and pipes and the moisture in the cold highland air, and he felt, beneath and around and through it all, Poseidon's presence in the deep structure. Not speaking. Not needing to. Just there. He looked out at the dawn and let himself be the size he actually was. It fit. Chapter 6, The Sea remembers everything. 3 weeks after the night in the astronomy tower, Voldemort made his move. Harry had been expecting it. Not with dread, he'd moved past dread sometime in the last month, sometime between the Gringotts ritual and the archive and the night Alcyone's fragments had said goodbye and he'd cried about it in front of people and the world had not ended. Dread required a specific relationship with helplessness, the feeling that something was coming and you had no agency in how it arrived. Harry didn't have that relationship anymore. He'd replaced it with something more useful, a clear-eyed, steady attentiveness. The difference between watching storm clouds and measuring them. Voldemort didn't know about the archive. He didn't know about Vale, or the seal, or the secondary anchor, or the 23 lives. He knew what he'd always known, that Harry Potter was the obstacle between him and complete dominion over the wizarding world, and that the prophecy demanded one of them die at the hand of the other, and that he had an army, and that Harry was 15 years old. He was operating on information that was approximately 3,000 years out of date, which was a disadvantage he didn't know he had. The attack came to Hogsmeade rather than Hogwarts itself, which Annabeth said, upon hearing it, was the tactically smarter choice. Hogwarts wards were too comprehensive to breach frontally, but Hogsmeade sat at the edge of the ward's range, a gap between the castle's protection and the open highlands, and an attack there served multiple purposes simultaneously. It drew Harry out. It created civilian chaos that the Order had to manage. It split the defensive response across two locations. Harry was in Hogsmeade when it started, which was either fortuitous or something else entirely. He'd been there with Percy, walking the village in the way he'd walked various parts of the Hogwarts grounds every morning, not for exercise but because physical proximity to the convergence points still taught him things, still refined his understanding of the deep structure beneath the area. Percy had been telling him about the Battle of Manhattan, the Titan War's final hour, with the specific conversational style of someone who'd processed the event enough to discuss it without being submerged by it. Harry had been listening and eating a pasty from the bakery that opened early for the castle staff and thinking that this specific texture of morning, was the kind of thing he wanted to protect. Then the Death Eaters arrived. 17 of them, operating into the village square in the grey 9 o'clock light, and the distinctive crack of simultaneous apparition across that many people had the sound of something serious. Harry put down the pasty. Percy's hand went to Riptide in his pocket. "How many?" Percy said. 17. At least. There may be more at the perimeter. Harry was already scanning, not just with his eyes, with the full breadth of his water sense, reading the moisture in the air to map body heat and movement in the spaces he couldn't directly see. 22 total. 5 at the village entrance, 5 at the eastern exit. 12 in the square. Voldemort? Harry reached for the particular presence he'd been connected to since the age of 1, the dark pressure behind his scar, which he'd spent 14 years treating as a threat and had been learning, cautiously, to use as a compass. Not here. He's watching from somewhere. The attack is a test. A test of what? Of what I've become, Harry said. He knows something's changed. He's felt the change in the scar connection for 3 weeks. He doesn't know what it means, so he sent scouts. He looked at Percy. Don't hold back. Percy's expression was the full version, not the diplomatic smile, not the measured public face, but the one that appeared when things became real and he stopped managing down to what the situation required and simply brought what he had. Wasn't planning to. The Death Eaters had started with the simple, efficient brutality of people who knew their work, stunning spells at the shop's windows, a reducto that took out the corner of the post office, 2 of them separating from the group to move down the residential lane. The handful of early morning villagers were scrambling, hiding, the specific panic of people who'd lived in terror long enough that the response was automatic. Harry stepped into the square. The 12 Death Eaters in the square registered him at different speeds, depending on their individual attentiveness, and the response ran through the group like a wave, recognition, then recalculation, then the particular kind of fear that wore aggression as a coat. The nearest one raised his wand. Harry flicked his own wand and the condensation on every cobblestone in the square rose simultaneously, pulling moisture from the stones and the morning air, constructing in approximately 1 second a wall of compressed water between himself and the nearest cluster of Death Eaters. It was 8 feet high and 2 feet thick, and when 2 stunners hit it they simply dispersed into the water mass harmlessly. Aguamenti, one of them called, probably recognizing a water-based defense and trying to overwhelm it by adding volume. The additional water joined Harry's construct because it was water and Harry was what he was, and the wall grew. Percy had gone left, had drawn Riptide and uncapped it, the pen transforming into the celestial bronze sword with the ease of something that had done it 10,000 times, and was moving through the square's left side with the smooth, economic efficiency of someone for whom combat was a deeply familiar language. He wasn't flashy. He was effective in the way deep water was effective, which was quietly and completely. The first Death Eater he reached fired a killing curse that Percy sidestepped with a movement that was technically too fast for someone without divine assistance, and then Riptide was at the man's throat and the man was making the specific calculation of someone who had just understood the hierarchy of the situation. "Drop your wand," Percy said pleasantly. "Or I can keep going, your choice." The wand dropped. Harry brought the water wall down and reformed it, not defensively this time, but offensively, a contained sphere of pressurized water that he sent rolling through the cluster of Death Eaters at the square's center. Not a killing curse. Not even a particularly dark piece of magic. Just water at pressure, completely controlled, hitting with the force of a car crash and dispersing without permanent injury. 6 people sat down involuntarily. The 5 at the village entrance felt what was happening through the ground and the communication structure of an organized attack, and they came in at a run, and Harry had 30 seconds to decide how he wanted to play the situation before it became numerically uncomfortable. He thought about Alcyone standing at the edge of the rift. He thought about what Percy had said, "You fight what's in front of you." He reached. Not for the constructed water. Not for the water in the square, which he'd been using with the careful precision of a scalpel. He reached for the water table beneath Hogsmeade, the deep highland aquifer running under the village, moving slow and cold through ancient rock, 60 feet below the cobblestones, and he asked it, not commanded, asked the way you ask something that has been waiting to be asked, "Come up." The square shuddered. The cobblestones separated, not explosively, but with the deliberate, unhurried authority of something far more powerful than the stones that covered it, water finding the gaps between the rocks and rising through them, not a flood, not a wave, but a controlled rise, 3 inches in 30 seconds, filling the square with cold highland groundwater that soaked through Death Eater boots and robe hems and communicated in very clear physical terms that the person managing this water was not working at the limit of their capacity. The Death Eaters at the entrance stopped. "You can leave," Harry said, from the center of the square, standing in the rising water which was not, he noted, touching him. It rose around his feet and stopped at his boot's edge as though there were a perimeter. "You can leave right now, and you go back and you tell him that this isn't what he remembers. That things have changed. A beat." He felt the scar connection pulse, Voldemort, somewhere, watching through this. Good. Let him watch. Or, Harry said, and let the water rise another inch with a thought, "You don't leave, and we continue, and I promise the outcome is the same either way except one of them involves everyone going home with all their bones." 13 of the remaining Death Eaters left. They operate with the fractured, individual cracks of people making independent decisions rather than tactical retreats. For stayed, the 4 that Harry had identified by their positions and their energy as the senior contingent, the ones who had too much fear of Voldemort behind them to retreat from a 15-year-old in front of them. Those 4, Harry and Percy dealt with efficiently and without ceremony, and Moody arrived from the castle 3 minutes later with 4 other Order members to take custody, and the village square was quiet. Harry let the groundwater recede. It took 2 minutes to drain back through the cobblestones, leaving everything just wet, not damaged. He'd been careful about that. The square looked like it had rained, which in Scotland was unremarkable. Percy sheathed Riptide and looked at the wet cobblestones and then at Harry. "The groundwater thing. Too much?" "No. Exactly right." A pause. "Did you just have a conversation with the water table?" I asked. It came. Harry picked up the pasty from where he'd set it on a dry doorstep. It was still warm. "The water in the area knows me. It's been 3 weeks at the convergence point. You asked the water table to come up. It said yes." Percy looked at him for a long moment with an expression that was equal parts impressed and something that was almost fraternal, the specific look of someone who has spent years being the most powerful person in a room and has just encountered someone who makes that feel relative. "Okay," Percy said. "Okay, yeah." Moody appeared beside them, magical eye rotating with the specific speed it achieved when he was processing something rapidly. He looked at the wet square, at the detained Death Eaters, at the complete absence of structural damage to the village. 15-year-old boys, he said, in the tone of someone noting a geological feature. 14, technically, Harry said. Birthdays in 2 weeks. Right. Moody looked at him. He'll come himself next time. I know. Are you ready for that? Harry looked at the wet square, at the highland sky pressing grey and close above the village rooftops, at Percy standing beside him with the easy, undemonstrative readiness of someone who was entirely comfortable being exactly where they were. Yes, Harry said. He meant it without performance or bravado. It was the most straightforwardly true thing he'd said in recent memory. Voldemort came on a Saturday. Not to Hogsmeade. To the grounds of Hogwarts itself, at 3 in the afternoon, in the particular brazenness of someone who had decided that subtlety was finished and what remained was confrontation. He came with 30 Death Eaters and the kind of magical force that bent the air around it, the distinctive pressure of a dark wizard who had spent decades accumulating power and had no intention of modulating it for the comfort of people he considered inferior. He came, Harry thought, because the Hogsmeade attack had scared him. Not physically. Voldemort was not easily frightened in the physical sense. But the scar connection had been running between them since Harry was 1 year old, and Harry had spent 3 weeks using it as a diagnostic tool rather than a burden, and he'd felt, in the days between Hogsmeade and this, the particular quality of Voldemort's thought that arrived when certainty was being replaced by recalculation. Voldemort had spent 15 years knowing exactly what Harry Potter was. He'd built his entire strategy around what Harry Potter was. And then something had changed in the scar connection, had changed in the air around their conflict, and Voldemort needed to know what it meant with the urgency of someone whose entire plan is premised on an assumption that may no longer be accurate. So he came to find out. The Order had 20 minutes warning. The Hogwarts wards reported the approach of significant dark magic at the perimeter, and those 20 minutes were used with the focused, practiced efficiency of people who had been preparing for exactly this. Dumbledore was at the front gates with 5 Order members. Harry was not. Harry was in the astronomy tower with Percy and Annabeth, and the deliberate choice to engage this on his terms rather than Voldemort's, which meant not standing at the gates where Voldemort expected him but choosing his own ground. He'll be angry you're not at the gates, Annabeth said, not looking up from her diagram, which had been updated 7 times in the last 3 weeks and was now a document of considerable sophistication. Good, Harry said. Angry people make worse decisions. He'll recognize the strategic choice. Also good. I want him to know I'm thinking strategically. I want him to understand this is a different situation than anything he's faced from me before. Harry was standing at the window, looking down at the grounds. He could see the disturbance at the gate, the Order engaging the Death Eater contingent, magical combat flaring in the afternoon light, and there, moving through it with the specific terrible grace of someone who had made himself into something more and less than human, Voldemort. There he is. Percy came to stand beside him. How do you want to do this? We go down, Harry said. Not running. Walking. He looked at Percy. I want him to see us coming. They went down through the castle, not hurrying, not because they weren't taking it seriously but because running communicated urgency and urgency communicated that the situation was beyond their management, and it wasn't. The castle seemed to help them, the staircases locking into place ahead of them, the doors opening at a touch, as though Hogwarts itself was making a choice about whose side it was on. They came out through the main doors and walked down the front steps and across the grounds, and the battle at the gate was, Harry registered it all, the Order members and the Death Eaters and the specific chess game quality of large magical combat, and he noted with a part of his attention that Moody was managing the Order's response with the comprehensive ferocity of a man who had been waiting his whole life to fight this particular battle in a situation this clear-cut. Voldemort saw them coming from 60 yards. He turned from the gate, from Dumbledore, from the battle he'd been managing with the absolute contempt of someone for whom it was all expected, and he looked at Harry, and Harry watched the calculation in his face, the red eyes reading what they saw, and finding it different from what they had predicted. Harry kept walking. Percy kept pace. At 30 yards, Voldemort raised his wand. Harry raised nothing. He had his wand in his hand, yes, he wasn't being theatrical about it, but he didn't point it, because what he was about to do didn't require pointing. He reached for the convergence point beneath his feet, running up through the castle's foundations and the Hogsmeade grounds and the bedrock of the Highland landscape, and he drew from it in the way he'd been learning for 3 weeks, the way felt like breathing now, like the simplest function, and he let the water in the ground answer. It came up the way it had come up in Hogsmeade, through the grass, through the cracks in the stone path, rising around the grounds with the patient authority of something that had been here before all of this and would be here after all of this, but more of it, and faster, because this was the convergence point and this was ground that had been responsive to his presence for 3 weeks, and what came up now was not a demonstration of capacity, it was the thing itself. The grounds filled. Not a flood, nothing reckless, nothing damaging. But the water rose through the grass to ankle height across the entirety of the castle grounds, cold and Highland deep and moving in a pattern that originated from Harry's position and radiated outward in perfectly concentric circles, and in the center of those circles, Harry walked forward and the water parted ahead of him and closed behind him and didn't touch him at all. Voldemort stood in it. The water touched his robes and the red eyes looked down at it and then up at Harry, and something crossed his face that was not quite fear but was in the same family, the particular expression of someone whose comprehensive understanding of a situation has just been revealed as insufficient. "Potter," he said. "Tom," Harry said. The name landed in the air between them the way Harry had intended, not as a weapon exactly, but as a statement. "I know what you are under everything you've built. You are not the darkness you've constructed. You are a person who made choices, and what you've made of yourself is not immutable." It hit Voldemort in the face like a physical thing. His expression went rigid with the specific kind of fury that was indistinguishable from exposure. "You think, I know what I am," Harry said, still walking, closing the distance. "I've known for 3 weeks. You've been feeling it through the scar and trying to understand it and not being able to, because the thing I am doesn't fit in the category you put me in 15 years ago." He stopped at 10 yards. The water was still rising gently, knee-height now, running cold around both of them. "I'm not the accident of a prophecy. I'm not the boy who lived. I'm not the thing you created when you tried to kill me and it didn't work." He held Voldemort's eyes. "I'm 3,000 years old, and I'm done being defined by you." Voldemort fired the killing curse. He fired it the way he'd fired it since Harry was 1 year old, with absolute conviction, without doubt, the curse that had ended more lives than Harry could count. Green light crossed the 10 yards between them in a fraction of a second. Harry moved the water. Not as a shield, not water absorbing a curse, which would have been simple deflection. He moved the water in the 3-dimensional space between him and the curse with enough precision to alter the curse's trajectory, bending it sideways the way you bend light with a lens, redirecting it into the ground to the right, where it hit the earth with the characteristic crack of a killing curse meeting solid material and dispersed. The grounds went very still. Voldemort stared at him. Harry was aware of everything around him, the battle at the gate which had paused, every combatant from both sides registered on his water sense like heat signatures in fog, Percy on his left, still and ready, Dumbledore at the gate with an expression Harry would think about later, the castle behind him with its 1,000-year weight of standing. "The Horcruxes are gone," Harry said. "All of them. Dumbledore's been working through them for the past year, you know this, you've felt them go. What you don't know is what it means for you now." He paused. "You're mortal again, Tom. Fully. And the prophecy is still active, and I'm still here. You think a water trick, I think," Harry said, and he let the convergence point rise through him, let the 3,000-year weight of it be present in his voice not as power to be wielded but simply as what he was, that we have both been pointed at each other by a prophecy neither of us chose, and that there are 2 ways this goes. You know the first one." He looked at Voldemort steadily. The second one is that you surrender. Not to the order, not to the ministry. To me. To the fact that this is over. I do not surrender to a 15-year-old. The water on the grounds moved, all of it, simultaneously, shifting from concentric circles to a single directional current flowing toward Voldemort's position, not touching him, just present, inescapable. Tom. I have the Atlantic on one side of me and Poseidon on the other. I have 23 lives worth of power that just fully consolidated 3 weeks ago. And I am standing in front of you in a body that a killing curse couldn't kill when I was 1 year old. He paused. You could fight me. You could fight me right now, with everything you have. And what happens at the end of it is the same thing that happened every other time, you lose, and this time there's no part of you left to come back. Voldemort looked at him. He looked at him for a long time, in the knee-high highland water of the Hogwarts grounds on a Saturday afternoon, the red eyes reading Harry's face with the desperate, ferocious intelligence of someone trying to find the angle they've missed, the gap in the argument, the place where the certainty is soft. Harry watched him not find one. The thing about Voldemort, the thing Harry had understood for years without being able to articulate, was that he was intelligent enough to recognize reality when it was presented to him with sufficient clarity. He'd built everything on a premise, and the premise was gone, and he was smart enough to know it. What remained was pride, which was not nothing. Pride in a person with Voldemort's capacity for self-narrative was considerable, but pride was frangible under the right pressure, and the pressure of 23 lives consolidated in a 15-year-old standing in the middle of the convergence point was, apparently, sufficient. Voldemort lowered his wand. Not dropped it, lowered it. It was a distinction Harry chose to honor, because it was the closest thing to dignity available in the circumstances, and Harry had never wanted this to be about humiliation. Humiliation didn't solve anything. It created martyrs. If I am taken, Voldemort said, to the Ministry, you won't be taken to the Ministry, Harry said. The Ministry is still arguing about whether you exist. You'd be out in 6 months. He glanced at Dumbledore, who had moved silently through the paused battle to stand at Harry's left shoulder. There's a different arrangement. One that doesn't rely on institutions that have already demonstrated they can't hold you. Dumbledore met his eyes and understood, and nodded once. The arrangement had been theoretical, discussed between Harry and Dumbledore and Annabeth in the week after Hogsmeade, because Harry had always believed this was how it would end, not in a blaze of mutual destruction, because that wasted too much and accomplished too little, but in a confrontation so complete that continuation became genuinely impossible. The arrangement involved ancient magical binding of the specific type that didn't rely on physical imprisonment but on willing acceptance, the kind of magic that worked because the bound party acknowledged the truth of their own defeat and the binding carried that acknowledgement permanently. Unbreakable in the oldest sense of the word, not locked against escape but made irrelevant, because what was bound was the capacity for the specific harm, not the person themselves. It was complicated magic. It had taken Hermione and Annabeth working together for 5 days to document it properly, which meant it was very well documented indeed. Voldemort looked at Harry for a very long time. This is not how it was supposed to go, he said. I know, Harry said. And he did, he knew it genuinely, not with sympathy for the Dark Lord's choices but with the particular awareness of someone who had read 23 versions of this kind of moment and understood that the ending almost never looked like what the participants had imagined. But it's how it's going. The binding took 20 minutes and the involvement of Dumbledore and Percy and Nico, who emerged from wherever he'd been with the timing of someone who'd been waiting for this specific requirement. It was silent and it was strange and it was completely definitive, and when it was done, Tom Riddle stood in the middle of the Hogwarts grounds in the receding groundwater and was, for the first time in 50 years, entirely harmless and entirely aware of it. His Death Eaters, without the central power that organized them, made various choices of varying intelligence. Most of them surrendered to the order within the next 20 minutes. Several tried to flee and found that Moody had anticipated this. The afternoon resolved itself into the specific organized chaos of a large battle's aftermath, people being detained and tended to and accounted for, the grounds assessed for damage that was, Harry noted with private satisfaction, remarkably minimal. Harry sat on the front steps of Hogwarts and watched it all happen and felt, not triumph, because triumph was too small a word for something this large, and not relief exactly, because relief implied that he'd been afraid, and he hadn't been afraid, not really, not since the Gringotts ritual had cracked the world open and showed him what was inside. He felt complete. Not finished, not done, because there was still Veil's movement and the equality problem and 6 weeks until term started and a conversation with Poseidon he'd been meaning to have properly for 3 weeks. There was still everything. But the specific incompleteness that had been living in him since he was old enough to know the shape of it, the sense of running a story he only half understood, of being moved through a pattern he couldn't fully see, that was gone. He understood the pattern now. Not all of it. But enough. Percy sat beside him without being invited and handed him a bottle of water from somewhere. "You all right?" "Yes," Harry said. And then, because Percy had told him not to armor it, "I'm better than all right, actually. I just don't entirely know what to do with that." "That's fine," Percy said. "Better than all right is a good problem to have. How do you usually handle it?" Percy considered this seriously. "I eat something. Then I tell my mom." He paused. "Then I usually sleep for approximately 12 hours. In that order?" "The order is flexible. The elements are consistent." Harry looked at the bottle of water in his hand, felt the particular aliveness of it, cold, simple, present, and drank, and it tasted like everything water tasted like after a very long effort, which was to say it tasted like the best thing he'd ever had. Hermione appeared at his right side, notepad in hand, quill behind her ear, and the expression she wore when she was approximately 3 seconds from saying something about the documentation that needed to happen and was making a heroic effort to wait. "You're going to say something about documentation," Harry said. "I was going to say that you were extraordinary," she said, with dignity. "The documentation conversation can wait 45 seconds. "She means it," Ron said, from behind them, sitting on the step above. "She turned to me when you moved the water on the grounds and she said, 'He's extraordinary,' and I agreed, and then she immediately said, 'Also I need to document this,' so that's the order of events." "For historical record," Hermione said, with even greater dignity. "I know," Harry said. He looked at her and meant it. "I know you mean it." She sat beside him on the steps and didn't open the notepad, which was the most affectionate thing Hermione Granger could do, and the 4 of them sat together on the Hogwarts steps in the receding afternoon light with the aftermath of everything moving around them, and it was the most specific kind of ordinary that Harry had ever wanted. The ordinary of people who had done something hard together and were allowed to simply be in the same place afterward. Annabeth and Nico joined them eventually, Annabeth with the blueprint rolled under her arm and a focused satisfaction in her face that meant something had worked exactly as calculated, Nico with the particular quiet of someone who had been in the boundary space doing something important and had come back to this side of things and was still recalibrating. Dumbledore came last. He stood before the steps and looked at Harry, and his expression was the uncushioned one, the one Harry had been seeing more of in the past 3 weeks, since Dumbledore had made his choice on the front steps of this same castle and stuck to it. "Well done," Dumbledore said. "It was everyone," Harry said. "Yes. But it started with you." A pause. "It started with you choosing to understand rather than simply overcome, which is rarer than it should be and more powerful than most people give it credit for." Harry held his gaze and thought about Veil, who was currently being held in Hogwarts under an arrangement that felt more productive than any alternative, and who had, in the 2 weeks since the Astronomy Tower, provided the Order with more actionable intelligence about Voldemort's network than they'd gathered in the previous 2 years, and who was also, quietly and somewhat to his own apparent surprise, engaged in genuine conversation with Dumbledore about the equality problem, which was real and needed addressing. He thought about Corvus Vale spending 300 years being the only person who knew the world was in danger, and how that had hollowed him out, and how the antidote to that was not justice in any conventional sense but recognition. Being seen. being handed back the weight he'd been carrying alone. "There's a conversation to be had," Harry said to Dumbledore. "About the Ministry and the Olympian connection. About the 400 years of pretending. About what happens when this, all of this, needs to be acknowledged officially." "I agree," Dumbledore said. "I want to be in that conversation. Not informed of its outcomes. In it." "Yes," Dumbledore said, simply. "I know." That night, the castle was quiet in the way that only large old buildings could be quiet, not empty but resting, the stones cooling in the evening air with the particular contentment of a building that had done what it was built for. Harry went to the astronomy tower alone. Not because he needed solitude, he had enough of it now that solitude was a choice rather than a condition, but because it was the right place for what he wanted to do. The convergence point was clearest there, the secondary anchor most audible, the whole deep structure of it most accessible. He stood at the window and looked out at the loch, dark and still in the evening, and at the Scottish sky doing its Highland thing of being enormous and pressing close simultaneously. He reached for Poseidon. Not with words. Not with the careful, considered asking he'd done before. Just the way you reach for someone you trust to be there, knowing they will be. The loch lit up from below, faint, blue-green, the bioluminescent pulse of the archive 2 miles away resonating with the presence it recognized, and in the light of it Harry felt his father. Not like meeting someone for the first time. Like recognizing someone you've always known. The particular recognition of Alcyone's soul finding the presence it had been oriented toward for 3,000 years, always aware of, never fully able to touch until now. He stood in it and let it be what it was. Poseidon didn't speak. He didn't need to. The presence said everything that needed saying, which was, "I see you. I have always seen you. I am sorry it took this long for you to know it. And I am here." Harry looked at the loch and felt the full weight of 3,000 years and let himself carry it without adjusting it down to a manageable size. He was the soul of Alcyone. He was Harry Potter. He was the boy from the cupboard under the stairs and the son of Poseidon and the keeper of a seal that held the world together and the person who had asked a groundwater aquifer to please come up and it had said yes. He was all of those things simultaneously, without any of them canceling the others out. That was, he understood, what being deep actually meant. Percy appeared at the tower entrance, not interrupting, just present, and sat on the floor against the doorframe with the ease of someone settling in for a while. Harry didn't turn around. "I was wondering when you'd come up." "I gave you 10 minutes, Percy said. That felt like a reasonable amount. It was. A comfortable silence. The loch pulsed gently below. "What happens now?" Percy said. "After all this settles." "School," Harry said. "5th year. Ordinary things." He paused. "Probably not that ordinary." "No," Percy agreed. "Probably not. But the ordinary kind of not ordinary. The kind where the world is not actively ending. My favorite kind." Percy paused. "I have to go home. My mom, and there are things back in New York that need me. The aftermath of the Titan War is still, I know," Harry said. He turned from the window. Percy was looking at him from the doorway with the expression Harry had come to recognize as the honest one, the one that didn't manage anything. "You're coming back, though." "Obviously." "Obviously," Harry agreed, and smiled, the real one, the one that arrived without being organized, the one Percy had said it took him 2 weeks to see but was apparently worth waiting for. "The Kipos thing," Percy said. "The guardian obligation. I want to be clear that I don't feel it as an obligation. I know. I feel it as, I have a brother now. That's what it feels like." Percy said it with the directness that was his characteristic mode, the way he said important things exactly as they were without qualification or softening. Not a metaphorical brother. Not a divine connection brother. A brother. Harry looked at him. 3,000 years of traveling alone through different lives, different bodies, different centuries, and in this one, this specific life, this body in this castle in Scotland, he had Percy Jackson sitting in his doorway telling him without preamble or self-consciousness that they were brothers. "Yeah," Harry said. "Yeah, that's what it feels like." "Good." Percy stood. "Then I'm leaving you with my sister on this side of the Atlantic, because Annabeth is staying to help Hermione with the archive documentation, and I want you to know I trust you with that because I trust you, not because it's convenient." "Annabeth is staying?" Harry said. "Does she know you're framing it as you leaving her with me?" "Absolutely not, and I will deny this conversation entirely." "Good instinct." Percy pulled Riptide from his pocket and looked at it for a moment, the pen, ordinary in every visual respect, and then looked at Harry. "You don't need guarding. I want to be clear about that. You haven't needed guarding since approximately 2 hours after we met. What I'm around for is the other thing," Harry said. "The other thing," Percy agreed. "The thing that's not guardianship. The thing where we're brothers." "Right. I know," Harry said. "I know what you're around for." Percy left the next morning with a backpack and a contact stone that pulsed warm in his pocket, and Harry stood at the gate and watched him go, and felt the distance between them begin to accumulate without feeling like separation, the particular connection of two people between whom distance was a technical condition and not a real one, maintained by something that predated both of them and would outlast both of them. He went back to the castle. Hogwarts in August had a specific quality he'd never had the opportunity to notice before, the great silence of an occupied but empty building, the way the staircases moved for no one and the ghosts drifted through corridors without anyone to drift past. He walked through it and felt the convergence point in the foundation and the castle's familiar weight of having stood here through everything, which was the same weight Harry was learning to carry in his own bones. Hermione and Annabeth were in the library. Their combined presence had transformed it in a week, books organized by subject and cross-reference and date simultaneously, the table covered in transcriptions and diagrams and cross-checks, 2 cups of tea going cold at opposite ends of the table because neither of them had remembered to drink them. They were in the middle of a discussion about the archive's third concentric ring that had clearly been going for several hours and showed no signs of resolution. "He doesn't mean vessel in the technical sense," Hermione was saying. The contextual implication depends entirely on which dialect of linear B this scribe was using, and based on the letterform evidence, the letterform evidence is consistent with at least 3 dialects, which is exactly what I'm. Harry sat down between them and pulled the nearest book toward him and started reading without saying anything. Both of them paused, looked at him, looked at each other, and returned to the argument without missing a beat, which was the most comfortable thing in the world. Ron was in the kitchen with the Hogwarts house elves, who had apparently taken to him with the enthusiasm of beings who recognized genuine appreciation of food when they met it, and who were currently feeding him a full Scottish breakfast at 11 in the morning while he discussed Quidditch with them, which was not a conversation Harry had expected house elves to engage in but which he recognized, hearing the animated voices from the corridor, was apparently going quite well. Nico was in the shadow of the astronomy tower's base, which was where Nico had taken to being, and when Harry passed he looked up and said, without preamble, "The in-between space is clean. The fragments have moved on. All of them." "Good," Harry said. "You felt them go?" "Yes." Nico looked at him with the ancient and young eyes. "Do you know where they went?" Harry thought about it. He'd felt the fragments move through him on the night of the astronomy tower, the brief contact with 23 lives, each distinct, each complete. He'd felt Alcyone last. And he'd felt, in the moment of that contact, not the sense of something ending but something arriving. A settling. "Back into the sea," Harry said. "Into the deep part. Where Poseidon keeps things that matter." Nico was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, once, with the specific nod of someone who has been in the business of souls for long enough to recognize the right answer when they hear it. "That's where they went," he confirmed. 2 days before the end of August, an owl arrived from the Ministry of Magic with a letter addressed to Harry James Potter that was, for the first time in his memory, not preceded by any dread whatsoever. He opened it at the breakfast table with Ron and Hermione watching and Annabeth reading over his shoulder without asking. The letter was from the new Minister for Magic, Amelia Bones, who had been appointed in the aftermath of Voldemort's binding when Cornelius Fudge had resigned with the specific disgrace of someone whose denial had been definitively disproven. Bones was the kind of person Harry respected on instinct, someone with no patience for theater and a clear-eyed understanding of what the wizarding world was and what it needed to be. The letter said, among other things, that the ministry was formally requesting Harry's participation in a commission to review the wizarding world's relationship with the Olympian divine world, to be co-chaired by himself and Albus Dumbledore, with additional consultation from relevant non-ministry parties. Relevant non-ministry parties was, Harry understood, the ministry's way of acknowledging Percy and Annabeth and Nico and the whole of the Olympian reality without having worked out yet how to say it in official language. He wrote back the same day. Yes. And then a second sentence, the commission also needs to include Corvus Vale, in an advisory capacity, pending the resolution of his legal situation. He has more relevant knowledge than anyone else in the room. Use it. He sealed the letter and sent it. Hermione was looking at him. You're really doing the Vale thing. The equality problem is real, Harry said. We've been over this. I know. Yes. You're right. She paused. He's going to be enormously difficult to work with. Probably. Harry picked up his tea. He's also spent 300 years being the only person paying attention to something important. The ministry has been ignoring him since before its founders were born. I think the appropriate response is not to keep ignoring him. That's very, don't say mature. I was going to say wise. Oh. He considered. That's fine. Ron leaned back in his chair with the expression he wore when something had settled into the right shape. You know what's strange, he said. This feels normal. What does? Harry said. This. Ron gestured at the table, at the breakfast, at the letters and books and two people arguing about Linear B at one end of it and Nico visible through the doorway and the Hogwarts summer quiet around everything. It's all completely insane. 3,000-year-old souls, Olympian archives, water tables coming up on request, the Dark Lord got bound in the Hogwarts grounds on a Saturday afternoon. Completely, utterly insane. He picked up his toast. But sitting here right now it just feels normal. Good normal. The kind we get to keep. Harry looked at him. Yeah, he said. It does. Outside, the lock caught the morning light and held it, the water carrying the particular quality it had carried since the secondary anchor was established, alive, deep, and patient, holding its share of the weight with the ease of something that had been doing important work for so long that the work had become simply what it was. In the archive below, the newest panels had been added. The Gringotts ritual. The arrival of Percy Jackson. The astronomy tower. The binding of Voldemort. The fragments going home. All of it recorded in the circular, concentric language of something that kept its records in stone because stone endured, because some things were worth remembering accurately, because the sea never forgot what it had made. The newest panel, at the very end of the sequence, showed two figures standing side by side on the Hogwarts grounds. One of them had Percy's height and easy stance. The other was smaller, dark-haired, green-eyed, and standing in water that parted around him and closed behind him and did not touch him at all. Beneath the panel, in Linear B that any scholar would recognize, two words, Alcyone. Home. Harry Potter sat at the breakfast table in Hogwarts in August, with his people around him and the deep world humming beneath his feet, and he was exactly the size he actually was, and it fit, and it was his, and it was enough. More than enough. The sea remembered everything. And this time, for the first time in 3,000 years, the sea was glad of what it remembered.